Conversion technologies. So looking at what do we have, what does the community have to work with, how can they convert that into the electrons and fuels necessary to support their lives and their livelihood. Biomass energy has largely been forgotten and kind of placed on to the side. When I speak to my other energy colleagues in the space, that's still a thing. Immediately everyone says, oh, it's too expensive. And I say, compared to what? What else can show up like biomass can? Our gas plants, we don't have any more gas. We need new pipelines if we're going to get more gas to the turbines that we have online. I'm a huge advocate for solar and battery storage. I serve on the board of directors for OCEA, and I regularly advocate for those, but they're intermittent. They don't necessarily show up when we need them. The same is true of wind and to some extent our hydro. So it's a very unique resource. You're going to hear about some facilities that were built and permitted and started operating decades ago. And we're going to share with you some of the barriers that they're facing, either to continue operations or to recommission those facilities, which are, as it happens, located in these energy islanded rural communities that also could really use a shot in the arm to help reinvigorate their economies. So I really appreciate all of you coming. We're going to do some very brief introductions. The concept here was that this is like an intellectual stone soup. You all know from your individual professional experiences and your understanding of your agencies or organization, what tools are available, what strategies have been used in the past. And I believe that at the end of this, we're going to spend some time collectively brainstorming. There's not going to be one solution. We have several problems, but I have confidence that in this room, we have the right minds, we've got the right connections to the right folks, resources, and agencies to come together with some strategies that can help keep the lights on. There are a lot of us. So if you could please just take about 2 or 3 minutes or what, if you don't need that much time, that's fine too, but please introduce yourself, whatever you feel is relevant to share about your experience and who you're representing today. We'll start over here.
Hey y'all, I'm Hugh Arsenault at Policy Analyst at ODOE, and I work on our day-to-day administration for RPS, the renewable portfolio.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is René Zamora. I'm a professor in Oregon State University College of Forestry, and I have worked extensively with biofuels, especially jet fuel out of forest residues.
Sean Elliott, Oregon Department of Energy Analyst. I work on self-direction of the public purpose charge, energy efficiency, and also renewables, and then as well interested in industrial symbiosis and potential to potentially apply these sort of opportunities in that realm and provide economic development in
Afternoon, my name is Rick Raw. I am a retired air quality program manager for the U.S. Forest Service in as a consulting with Biomass One. And so hopefully.
Hey everyone, Mike Lerman, I'm the Air Quality Planning Section Manager for Oregon DEQ.
I'm Erin Tiber-Bond, the Legislative and Policy Analyst for Quality Programs at DEQ.
Jennifer Horton, I'm the Air Quality Coordinator for Oregon DEQ. Courtney Blathers, Regional Solutions Coordinator in the Governor's Office. I work in Lynn and Weekend Lane.
Hi everyone, Heather Stevens. I'm a Regional Development Officer at Business Oregon. I also cover Linn, Benton, Lincoln, and Lane counties, but I'm also the forestry and road products sector lead for the agency.
Hi everyone, I'm Barbara White. I'm a consultant for Biomass One, and I'm a principal and co-founder of Highland Economics.
Hi, everybody. Josh Proudfoot. I'm wearing two hats today. One is consultant to Biomass One, and the other is one of the group facilitators for the Biomass Utilization Working Group. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Steve Courtney with the Beck Group. We're a forest products planning and consulting business out of Portland, and I'm here helping Highland Economics in the study for Biomass One.
I'm Bill Carlson. I have a little firm called Carlson Small Power Consultants, and I've been in the power generation business for about 55 years, and for the last 40 primarily in biomass energy, and I've worked extensively in Oregon, even though my office is in Redding, California.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gerald Holthusen, and I work for D.R. Johnson Lumber.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dave Moldall, Energy Trust of Oregon Renewables. I manage the Custom Solutions Program at Energy Trust.
Good afternoon, Maureen McGee. I'm the Government Affairs Chair of the Government Affairs Department Chair at the law firm of Tonkin Torp out of Portland, and I am here today as a consultant to Biomass One with our legislative affairs.
I'm Greg Blair. I'm the managing general partner and majority owner of Biomass One. I've been in the industry for 40 years. I was the construction lender on the project in 1985. And this is the third biomass PPA we're trying to get done.
Hey everyone, excuse me. Hi everyone, my name is Kurt Lumpkin. I'm the general manager at Biomass One. About 30 years in operations and power generation.
Good afternoon. I'm Derek Marr. I'm the fuel manager at Biomass One, and I've been involved in wood products and forestry issues over 35 years.
I'm Carl Strahl. I'm with Oregon Biochar Solutions, which is a subsidiary of Biomass One, and I've been there since 2017.
Hey everybody, Grace Thurfall on the parametrics team, also as a consultant to Biomass One and with the other hat of the Oregon Biomass Utilization Working Group.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lunsford, also with parametrics as a consultant to Biomass.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a senior policy advisor for the Oregon Department of Energy. And so we try to put this together with Shannon to try to highlight the need that we've identified for more in-state generation and our interest in trying to help with biomass projects. So I primarily focus on fuels, that could be natural gas, but that can also be biomass for the state, work on policy for that state. So I'm interested to learn today what everybody has to say and excited for the conversation.
I'm Jennifer Villalobos, the division assistant for ODOE.
Sarah, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so sorry for being late. I had a meeting that ended at noon in Eugene. I am Sarah Markey. I'm the community navigator at ODO. I support rural, tribal, and coastal communities as well as our economic development initiatives. So thanks for being here in our building.
Oh, and can I interrupt one more thing? Logistics. I don't know if you saw, so there's a restroom down the hall and to the right, and there's a code for it, 1859. Hopefully you see that. And there's also a drinking fountain down there if you need it.
Thank you.
And online we have, let's see, we'll start with Jessica.
Good afternoon, Jessica LaBerge. I'm the Regional Solutions Coordinator for Douglas, Coos, Curry, Jackson, and Josephine. So I've got one of the D.R. Johnson plants and Biomass One. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jessica. Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Aycock. I'm also a Regional Solutions Coordinator. I'm in Central and South Central Oregon, and in my prior career, tracked probably 12 to 15 different biomass power-related proposals.
Thanks, Scott. Jody? Oops, we can't hear you, Jody.
Sorry, is that better? Jody Westbrook's president, D.R. Johnson Lumber Company, and glad to see you all and meet you all and appreciate your time. We're excited about getting our project going and appreciate any help you can give us. So,
Kyle.
Hey all, Kyle Petrosini. Sorry I wasn't able to join you all in person today. I work for Dave Moldall at Energy Trust of Oregon on the Custom Solutions Renewables program.
Martha. Let's see. Martha, can you hear us? You're up. Introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. This is Marta Terence with Business Oregon, Regional Development Officer for Jackson, Josephine, and Klamath and Lake County. I'm in a co-working space, so I'm going to stay on mute. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. Trent.
Yep, Trent Middlebrooks. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for DR Johnson and related companies.
And Karen.
Hey, everybody, Karen Chase. I'm the Community Strategies Manager for Energy Trust of Oregon.
Awesome. And you know, I really jumped the gun. I think I was nervous making sure that we didn't waste any time, but this is really a meeting that was put together by ODOE, and I wanted to thank you for organizing this, Michael, having the space and for the support. So we're going to start things off with DR Johnson, so you can all kind of level set and get a feel for what they have to offer, what they're up against. Daryl has made the long drive over from the east side where he is the manager. And if you would like to come on up here, Daryl, you're up to bat.
Well, I will say that I was surprised when I saw the meeting invite for a Friday afternoon. I figured that there would be nobody here. So I thought, well, that'd be pretty easy. Looks like everybody showed up. That's impressive. So DR Johnson, we have two cogen facilities. One is on the west side of the state on this side, and then the other is on the east side of the state. We have one down in Douglas County. And down in Riddle, which is about 20 miles down below Roseburg. And then we also have one over in Prairie City, which is just about 13 miles east of John Day. So these two facilities were built in the 80s and they ran for about 20 years. And as Shannon already mentioned, you know, we have two facilities that were already up and going and not now. These facilities were shut down. The PERPA contracts that we had at the time ran out, and it didn't make sense to restart them once the contracts ran out. Back then, natural gas was a better way to run cogens, I guess. You guys know a lot about that stuff. But today things have changed. And you all know that natural gas is expensive, and nobody wants to use that word. So biomass is something that's really important for all of us. You know, you think, well, biomass is not a big deal. I can burn it in my backyard. And if I don't like my neighbor, then it's really fun to burn it. But you can get something from that biomass. And we can use that biomass for good things. And we can use the biomass in these two facilities. We can use it to stabilize the economy. And we can use it to obviously put people back to work. We can use it to deal with our wildfire issues. I mean, like I said, when I saw the list of people who are going to be here today, I thought, holy cow. Now, these are all the people that I try to get a hold of. And I'm sorry, I know that a lot of you have heard this story already from me, but to have everybody in the same place at the same time, to me, is kind of like having a dream team of people, like Shannon said, who are problem solvers, who actually know how to get things done and are willing to do so. I very much appreciate having you all here. Like I said, I've spoken with most of you, but having everybody as a group, it seems like a good opportunity for us to look at the problems that we have, like Shannon already pointed out, and find ways to get through them, because it is really important. These two facilities that we have, they're about 8.5 megawatts that we can put out onto the grid. And, you know, obviously in each facility, but so you say to yourself, okay, well, 8.5 megawatts, that's great. You know, what's that really mean? Well, what that means is, like, especially Well, it's not just especially on the east side of the state, it's east and west side of the state. Our industry is in trouble. And, we need to do something. And, I'm talking about the forestry industry in general. We seem to be being phased out. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. We live in a place that has a lot of timber. We have a lot of opportunity to stay working. And, it seems like we keep getting pushed away. Biomass is pretty awesome because you can take biomass and you can stand up, let's say, Prairie City. It doesn't have much going on. As a matter of fact, there's almost no industry over there other than Forest Service and some small industries that are happening. So what you can do is you can take that biomass, you can run it through our facility over there and you can create power, you can create jobs. You can create a sustainable environment that people want to be involved with, and it can be long-term. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do here is we're hoping to put these facilities back up and running. And like I said, it accomplishes all kinds of things. It puts people back to work, stabilizes our community, it stabilizes our forest, and it gives us power back on the grid. That obviously is pretty important today. So one thing I wanted to say before I got too much further into it is, you guys are all going to have a bunch of questions as far as how this can happen and how we can put this stuff together. But don't be afraid to ask them. And certainly, Sharon, I think you put our emails and stuff on the back of this. So please contact us. You got Jody and Trent and myself and so many others who are involved who would love to talk and come up with solutions as far as how we can do this. So what we have going today is we want to stand up these two cogens, and putting these two cogens back is really important for both Prairie City and Riddle. These local economies are in rough shape and they need help. And instead of us all just going away and saying, well, we're not going to do anything about it, we're just going to go away, we're going to let the forest burn, we don't care, we're going to move out away from these areas and just be done with it. We want to come up with a solution that works. And we think we have. And we're ready to go back to work right now. We have some problems, we have some roadblocks in the way. Shannon's going to talk about that in a little bit, but what we have going right now is we have been working with the National Forest, and we have 6 different forests who are willing to work with us. We have the USDA that's willing to work with us. We have our local and state, federal politicians who are willing to work with us. There's been nobody who has really been in the way of what we're doing. We're really close to putting this whole thing together. And what that would mean by putting all this together would mean we would be providing about 500 jobs for the state of Oregon. We would be dealing with fixing about 10,000 acres of whether it's Forest Service, BLM, state or private land, and doing wildfire mitigation work in those areas. And then also grid resilience, which I think is a big deal too today. So having that done, we figure that by putting those people back to work, we're helping our industry by creating a market where there isn't one today. It was mostly just on the east side, but it's kind of on the west side today too. Our market is in trouble and we have a way to address that. So we kind of hope to make that happen. So if we were to say, well, how much ground, is 10,000 acres, what does that convert to? It converts to about 400,000 green tons of biomass a year. And that's stuff that doesn't have any value today. That's that stuff that I was talking about earlier, that, you could have fun and burn it in your backyard and smoke your neighbor out and stuff, but we can actually do something with that by converting it into energy, and we can convert it into jobs.
I have a question, Daryl.
Yeah.
So the 10,000 acres, let's say you came back online next year and you were operating for the next 20 years. Is that over the same 10,000 acres that you're providing treatment to, or is that a roving 10,000 acres that over time migrates? Like you get done treating an area and you move to the next?
Well, it really depends. I think there's so much ground, and it's a great question. It's so much ground. Let's say on the mount here alone, Shannon, there's about 300,000 acres that needs to be treated. So that's just on the Mount Airy National Forest. And I think it's probably true with all those forests, as far as how much ground could be treated. I don't know. I think that we probably wouldn't get back to the one we started, and east side, west side is different. West side grows really fast, east side grows a little bit slower. So you could treat ground over there and it would stay treated for a lot longer than it would be on the west side.
Got it.
Yeah, but that's a good question. So, anyway, if we do this, I kind of wanted to work out the math a little bit here. So we figure we could put about 150 jobs per facility back on the market. And I'll tell you how we can do that. So to run our cogens, we figure it takes about 50 people with the people it takes in the cogen and plus the infrastructure jobs that come with it. Business Oregon told me that with every job you create, it creates about 3/4 of a job. So, take it or leave it, whether that's the truth or not. But we use that math to say that, we'd come up with about 260 jobs per facility to go back on. What that means overall is, like I said, it puts us in a position to put a community back up where there really isn't very many jobs. And I guess if I was to make the biggest point I wanted to make here today was to ask you guys and to explain to you guys why this was so important. It's so important because there's not a lot of hope out there for a lot of people as far as jobs go, and certainly timber jobs, because they seem to be going away. It's better on the west side, obviously, than it is on the east side. But on the east side, it's becoming pretty grim. And people are constantly coming up to me and asking the question, hey, when are you going to restart? What are you going to do? How are you going to move forward and provide us jobs? And so Jody has made the commitment to do something about it and to provide jobs for people. And that's what we want to do. Like I said, Shannon's going to talk about some roadblocks that we have in the way of that. But what I would ask from all of you here is that we need to find a solution. We're so close. We've gone like 90% of the way. We have the Forest Service lined up. We have good financing lined up. We have a good business plan set up and ready to go. We have these facilities that exist today that could be quickly started. And we have a few things left to get out of the way. And I think that this room could figure that out. So with that, I think Shannon, go ahead and.
Sure. And as I bring this up, could you, when you say that the Forest Service and the BLM, is there anything that you can share about that? Is like, what's the setup? Is there like a long-term treatment offtake agreement?
Yeah, so, and probably all of you have read the news and you see that the Forest Service, they want to make the forest work again. The chief of the Forest Service he has a directive to find ways to make a market, find ways to treat biomass, find ways to make the Forest Service productive. And so what they have offered was 20-year agreements to go out and treat land. And this is what we've been talking to the Forest Service about, also the BLM. And we're trying to work through to try to find a way to make it work out for all involved. And the Forest Service is really engaged because the problem is that they don't have the people or the money to deal with their own land. It's too much, it's expensive. And they're just like all of us, they're tired of seeing it burn. And so they're wanting to find solutions. And when I talked to the Forest Service and I said, hey, I'm gonna go over there, Salem, we're gonna talk to the Energy Commission and lots of other people in the room. And what the Forest Service said is, please tell them that we want this to happen. We want these two facilities to go because it means that we have the opportunity to treat up to 10,000 acres a year. And that opportunity really doesn't exist right now. And so them having that opportunity, that's probably the most important part of it, because they don't want it to burn. You know, we can put it through our cogens and we burn 96% of the particulates out of it. Only 4% comes out, which is below the EPA standard, which is what, 9 parts per million, I think.
Gerald, may I ask about kind of the economics of, this is such a, you have 10,000 acres, such a wide amount of area that I assume is pretty far away from your individual plants. So how does the economics work of going out there? I guess, I assume big diesel trucks, you're loading them up, you're taking them back to the facility. I imagine, you know, you'd be burning so much fuel and so many labor hours collecting all these materials and bringing over.
Yeah.
Burning for electricity. Can you make enough electricity to justify all that labor, all that time? Because I know that's always been the challenge of biomass, is kind of figuring out that collection and distribution.
Yeah, and it still is a challenge.
Yeah,
it really is. And distance does make a difference. So, you know, if it's, you have to stay within a range. But let's say, take the Forest Service, for example, they have to treat X amount of acres. I mean, it's their directive to do so, right? And the money that they use to treat those acres, we figure with that same money, we could get that material brought to us instead of having them burn it, because they'll go out and they'll cut it, they'll pile it, and then they'll come back later and burn it. And that's all labor intensive. It's expensive for them. And we believe that for the price that they're already paying to do that, they could just deliver to us and then they don't have to burn it. And that's what they really like about it.
Okay, so you don't actually have to collect it yourself. Forest Service collects it, brings it to you.
Overall, yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're not, you have to be responsible for that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you're still responsible for it because you still want to make sure, you know, you manage the program. But as long as they have that in place, then yes, they essentially pay for the service work end of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have to do any of the collection. We have to do the storage. They bring it all over.
Yeah, the storage is not a problem. We can store 2 to 4 months worth of material. And so, yeah, so these facilities, they'll burn about 20 loads a day, like 53-foot vans. So it's about 7,000 vans a year. That's what they'll go through.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's an opportunity for them to get their work done, and then they can get something back out of it. And it turns into a good story because it's a way you can stand up in your community. You can keep the money local. And that's another thing that happens is, I probably better slow down a little bit and let Shannon get up. But what happens is, you know, these communities, they burn and people come in from long distances and the money doesn't even stay there. And that's part of, yeah, I should really be careful. It's good, but maybe I won't. It seems like if we don't do something about this, our plan is just let it burn. And we don't want to do that. I don't think anybody wants to do that. Rather than just let it burn, I think that we need to find a way to make it work. We can get something back. We can make keep our forest nice. I know when I was coming down the river, even this afternoon, you drive through a lot of black sticks. And by doing this and by presenting this kind of model out there, others will see it and probably adopt the same thing, because it's the same. They're already doing the work, except we'll just convert it into energy. So.
single time handling, single mobilization, that's where the savings comes in.
Yeah, yeah, because when you go into areas and you do multiple different things to the same thing, it just gets more and more and more expensive. So,
One of the reasons that I am personally so intrigued with biomass, and I think that this is largely going unsung. I'm spending a lot of time in the Public Utility Commission these days, and we're trying to figure out how do we place value on different types of generators, the resources that we need. And right now, our default, our proxy is a 4-hour battery. That's what is held up, like, how much does it cost to install a 4-hour battery? That's what we're competing against. What's very interesting about these biomass facilities is there's literally 2 to 4 months of energy storage. So they're very there. That's not being monetized right now. So that's one of the problems that we have in keeping these facilities going, getting public power purchase agreements is clarifying and getting more transparency into what are the resources that we're buying and how are we paying for these different attributes. Another really unique attribute is when you think about where these biomass plants are, they're in these kind of remote timber camps. That's where they popped up because that's where all of the biomass is coming. Right now, in my world, we call those isolated load pockets. They don't have high population counts. If they're served by a larger investor-owned utility, they're not the top of the priority list to get the service back on. Utilities are graded and judged and have compliance based on how many people lost power and for how long. So when you're in these little isolated load pockets, it's problematic. Since our utilities have no cap on their liability from wildfire, their first tool is to shut the power down if there's a doubt. So these same communities, their power is out. Sometimes that means, it definitely means loss of livelihood. You can't participate in the meetings. You can't run your drill. You can't pump gas into your car. If your phone wasn't charged, you can't even communicate. In some cases, it means loss of life. My sons live in Puerto Rico. After Hurricane Maria, 2,200 lives were lost, not because a tree fell on them or a car was blown into them, that they did not have access to energy. The DR Johnson facility on the east side already has a backup generator. What's important about that is it means that when it's back up and running, not if, and the grid goes down, they can black start. And they can provide power not only for themselves and their employees, but we're doing a lot of work in Oregon right now this summer because we passed the most aggressive microgrid bill in the nation last year to understand what are the rules and configurations and ownership so that facilities like this can provide electricity to the critical services that their community needs. These facilities are really uniquely poised to deal with that broader microgrid opportunity. So another, the clock is ticking. In 1921 or in 2021, we passed HB 2021, which is our clean energy legislation. And those of us that were advocating very, very hard to put some compliance teeth into that bill to make sure that we have renewable resources actually built in Oregon by Oregonians and that money would stay in Oregon. We got 2 little concessions into that bill. One of them is this, that 10% of the electricity that is delivered, retail delivered by the investor-owned utilities needs to be served by small-scale renewables. They don't all have to be in the state of Oregon. We lost on that, but at least we got small-scale renewables, which is important because they're right-sized for the communities that they serve. Biomass plants are small-scale renewables. They have renewable energy credits. They contribute to the RPS. The clock is ticking. They need to come up with those renewables by 2030. They have their compliance filings that are kind of cloak and dagger. They're not really showing us how far along they are. We know PGE has a long way to go, and we get mixed messages from PacifiCorp. So If we're looking at the small scale renewables, and as I said, I do a lot of work for Oregon Solar and Storage Industry Association, we're fighting over siting. You can't even get a permit to site this stuff. Or we're arm wrestling about, is this high value or low value farmland, and what are we gonna do? So much uncertainty to get to the point that you can flip a switch. These facilities are already constructed. The equipment is already in place. The fuels are literally next door to them. And thankfully, right now, they have the workforce that's knowledgeable that they continue to put to work or that they can bring back into the facility, which might not be the case in the future. So it sounds like great. What is the problem? Here's the problem. As soon as the facility stopped, when they got their PPA ran out, they were probably offered a new PPA at the then avoided cost prices, which were probably about half of what it would take to operate the facility. So they can't do it. They can't get a new PPA. The minute they drop out of that and are not selling that power, they lost their interconnection. They have to go all the way back to the end of the line to what we call an interconnection queue. We've got multiple different utilities that own the transmission that they would be interconnected to. In the case of Pacificorp over on the west side for Riddle, we've been told that they need to get into the next cluster study. Cluster studies are when the utilities say we're going to wait until we've got all these new applications, and then we're going to process them all together, and then we'll let you know what came out of that process. That won't start until November. They won't have an outcome from that until April. Then they'll go into another study. Then they'll tell them what they need to buy and the substations and the transformers and anything like that is going to take another 2 to 3 years. There are mechanisms in place for fast track interconnection. This has been done at the PUC before for community solar, another special type of resource that we decided the society has a lot of interest in. They have fast tracked really small systems for 2 megawatts and under. I realize that PUC isn't in the room, but we continue to talk to them and we will be following up with them after. But one of the solutions that we're looking for is a fast track for small scale renewables that are already in place, they're permitted, their equipment, they are ready to roll because frankly, we're in a state of emergency, both on the energy and resource insufficiency side of the equation and on the wildfire side of the equation. It's even more complicated if we go to the other side. They've got OTEC, which is a small community utility, and if we only had to deal with them, it would be amazing. They're so great. Where other utilities have 3 different phases of study, they roll it all into one and get her done. Unfortunately, they also have to wheel across Idaho Power. Idaho Power is now trying to get OTEC to take over all of their distribution. So OTEC is going to end up serving twice as many people and twice the area, but Idaho Power is keeping all of its generating resources. And OTEC can't get any more from BPA. So there's got to be some kind of a special solution. That might be something that the governor's office might need to weigh in on. There's a bigger deal going on over there with these changes in service territory. But that is the single barrier to these facilities, both of these facilities coming back online as quickly as possible and possibly not even making it in time for the 2030 is interconnection. So some potential policy solutions, that fast track for interconnections is something that we're investigating. If we could get biomass generation included into the resource portfolios that the investor-owned utilities, that doesn't mean that they have to buy it. It does mean they have to put it in the model and give it a chance to compete against the other resources and all of the different attributes that they have. Also in our procurement in the state, there's no, you don't pay more for certainty and deliverability. Certainty is what I just described. Oh, I'm responding to an RFP. I'm going to build a 100 megawatt solar project. but it's not built yet. Things could happen between now and then versus I'm bidding into this RFP and my facility's right here. It's ready to roll. Deliverability is where are you in the grid? Are you right next to a load? Both the rental facility and Biomass One that we'll be pivoting to next on the west side should be paid a much higher premium value because they don't need any transmission to get to the loads. Not, I shouldn't say any, they're right next to the loads that they're serving. They're not congesting the existing transmission and they're certainly not waiting the 5 to 10 to 15 years for the transmission to be built. That, by the way, the same ratepayers are going to pay billions of dollars for. Really exciting about this 20-year offtake, fuel offtake. And I think that when Greg talks about Biomass One, you can kind of put that into perspective, what that means in terms of your availability, access to capital that you need to get these systems back up and running. So I'm gonna do a quick pivot here, but again, Daryl and Trent's on the line. Jody's up there in her in her Hollywood Squares box. They're really eager to make this happen and really support the communities that they're in. So I encourage you, if you have any follow-up questions or ideas after this, to get in touch with them. I'm gonna find our next deck here. Kurt.
There's a question in the chat from an online person.
Oh, thank you.
It's from Scott, who wants to come up with. You want to outside?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just on that fuel supply piece, it's been a minute, but there were these stewardship agreements and stewardship contracting things, and they might have maxed at 10. I don't remember. Is that still available to folks for federally sourced biomass material?
So there was one negotiated on the Mount Here National Forest for 10 years. And the 20 years that Daryl just alluded to was in the one big beautiful bill that provided the new authority for monthly earning.
Okay, thanks.
Good.
There we go.
Good, thank you, Shannon.
Okay.
Yep. So thank you, Shannon. Thank you again, Michael, for providing this forum and for all the folks gathered here today. My name is Kurt Lumpkin. I'm the general manager at Biomass One. And first off, Daryl, I think you peeked at my notes. So he's taken a large part of what I was going to say. So I'll just reiterate so you don't have to suffer through that again. Well, suffer's not quite the right word. All of the same challenges that are facing DR Johnson are facing Biomass One LP. So I won't go over that. What I will do, and Shannon, if you advance that to the next slide, let's just speak about some of the specifics of our facility. So we're a 28.5 megawatt capacity renewable biomass plant. We're located in White City, Oregon, in Southern Oregon. So as you can see from the numbers up there, we produce approximately 220,000 megawatt hours annually, which is about enough to power 25,000 standard power consuming homes. We source biomass residuals from a number of different outlets, and you can see the numbers there. And we're going to get more into that with later presentations, more nuance and specifics about where we source that fuel from. We also do have biochar, which one of our other team members will speak more in depth to. But so our facility, what I wanted to do today was just make sure that everybody knows that the 85 employees and families that our facility supports, and that there are, there are real faces behind that. So this has the potential to impact people's lives in a very big way. So thank you, Shannon. And so So we are, biomass, being we are a part of the renewable portfolio standard, and in the renewable energy mix, I think we are, as a percentage of power generation as a whole, we are less than some of the other forms. But we exist for a very specific reason. And our origination, now that has changed over the years. So in 1987, after plant construction, it came out of the 70s energy crisis as a hedge against, Middle East fuel and oil imports. And so we've kind of executed that mission, we feel, very well over the years, but our mission has changed. So, and it has changed along with other factors like, so perhaps changing climate, longer fire seasons. So, we feel our primary mission has pivoted a bit. And that power generation is it's a useful, necessary byproduct, but maybe not what we are positioned to be best at. And what we feel we might be positioned to be best at is in mitigating high hazard fuels. And as anybody in the Pacific Northwest knows, as we're coming into fire season and air quality is impacted for long stretches of time, how can we reduce that biomass load in the forests so that wildfires burn for less time and with less intensity? And so reducing wildfire risk, also diversion of material from local landfills. So those landfills are better positioned to take other waste streams when there's a better useful outlet for biomass. And then every megawatt hour that's generated by renewable, like Biomass One, is 1 megawatt hour energy that doesn't have to be generated by a fossil fuel plant. So I think that advances several goals, not least of which is greenhouse gas goals. I spoke to keeping smoke out of the air in an air quality index, which can be very problematic, especially if you have some type of respiratory condition. Or even if you don't, sometimes the AQI is very bad, and just going outside, you want to do it for short periods of time. And then enriching our soil environmental remediation speaks directly to our biochar co-product of combustion.
Can you stand closer to the mic? The people online are having problems.
They're having problems? Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. No, that's fine. Thank you very much. So yes, that speaks directly to our biochar product, and Mr. Carl Strahl will go more in depth there. Next slide, please, Shannon. So forest management, not quite yet, Carl, sorry. That was a premature call to action. So primary, one of the primary benefits that we bring, right? Forest management, wildfire mitigation. So if there's a wildfire that is uncontrolled combustion, we would much rather have that as controlled combustion through our pollution control equipment. So we're going to reduce PM 2.5 amongst all flavors of particulate matter, but specifically PM 2.5, because that has specific human health impacts that some of the larger fractions of particulate matter don't carry. So as we see, open burn events, greenhouse gases, criteria air pollutants, and chief among those probably the particulate matter. Direct, day-to-day operation, as you can see there. So we employ roughly approximately 85, it depends on the season, full-time employees at the plant among various occupations and skill sets. We support, I won't give the number because our partner in Highland Economics is going to do a deep dive into that. So Barbara she'll give you much better information than I can give you right now. Some of our community involvement activities. So As you can see, Rope Retreat, homeless shelter, Jackson County, Access Food Share, which is a local food bank that helps provide food for those people who might be food insecure. One other thing I'd like to touch on is we're involved directly with the Bureau of Labor and Industries in our apprenticeship programs. So all of our electricians, millwrights, mechanics, and boiler operators are offered the opportunity to go through the apprenticeship program and then become journeymen as they graduate from the program. So it's worked very well for us over the years. I've been at the plant just at 20 years now, and it's been part of the plant program for as long as I've been. Next slide. So Oregon Biochar Solutions. So this is a co-product of combustion that we are very excited about. And to tell you more about that is our head of our biochar division, Mr. Carl Strahl. And wait, one thing before you get started. So does anybody have any questions about what I've covered so far? Kind of who we are and our facility? Either everyone is bored or I am excellent at explaining.
All right, so Oregon Biochar Solutions was founded in 2017 and is a wholly owned subsidiary of Biomass One. Very early on, we figured out that there was not much of a biochar market for biochar, at least in the US. And so we pivoted to trying to develop markets in addition to trying to sell biochar. One of the benefits that we had that we didn't know about early on was the technology, the boiler technology that we had that produces biochar, produces a grade of biochar that is incredibly useful across a wide range of different markets. There are multiple different categories, product types. When you hear about biochar, there's high yield and low yield, which is you get a large amount of biochar from your inbound feedstock, or you get a low yield, meaning you get a lot less biochar out of the incoming feedstock. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is by production type. There's gasification, pyrolysis, and then combustion. And with the type of biochar that we make, it is a low yield product that has a very high fixed permanence, meaning that's a very recalcitrant carbon and very difficult to degrade. One of the few ways you can actually get rid of it is burning it. The other way would be a chemical degradation, but other than that, it is very, very persistent in the environment, which for this type of product is beneficial. Let's see. It's been around for a long time. Humans have been making charcoal and putting it in soil for tens of thousands of years is the best guess. It's been discovered in wells in China, and radiocarbon dating shows that's over 3,000 years old. In terms of the markets that we serve that are, I think, important to Oregon, right now we are working on the Portland Harbor remediation site. We'll be sending approximately 80 truckloads of our material up there. And that is to remediate an old brownfield site that is contaminated with benzochlorine and a few other contaminants. We've also been heavily involved in research around PFAS. And this gets back to our production technology being a significant advantage for us in this space. Low yield biochars with a really high permanence ratio and a very stable aromatic carbon type, I guess you could say, are very effective at sorbing PFAS. They sorb at a much higher rate than other types of biochars and charcoals. And they also have the ability to hang on to those charcoals for a much, much longer time. The advantage of using a biochar over other treatment methods is that when you're using a biochar, high fixed carbon biochar, you can do an in situ remediation as opposed to scraping the soil, hauling that off to a toxic landfill, and essentially capping it. So you can actually, in most cases, do an in situ remediation with biochar. There are some downsides though. Most of the biochar plants that are being put in today are what we would consider high yield biochar plants, meaning they're capturing between 20 and 30% of the inbound mass of material as carbon. And in terms of carbon markets, you get a lot more carbon credits from a high yield biochar than you do a low yield biochar. The flip side to that is the high yield biochars are a lot less useful in industry. But in terms of Biomass One, Oregon Biochar Solutions, that just means that we can't create quite as much product and get quite as much revenue. So in 2018, I started working with a company called Jekka out of Canada and Pro Earth out of Sweden. And in 2020, we began the process of becoming the first facility in North America and one of the first in the world to become certified for carbon credit removal. And Shannon has a video here. She's going to play it.
Share something?
Okay, it's playing on that.
Oh, it's not going there. It's not coming out. But...
The trees look pretty.
Oh shoot, I left. I did. I was thinking that we would need to do that.
Well, Shannon, I can go talk to Connor and see if he can help us, the RT guy, or we can pause this and come back to it.
I think that's the thing to do. Stop. Okay.
There you go. You have something up there on the left.
Yeah, and then I muted it again.
No, let's move on and come back to it, maybe. That would be good.
I think we're
Yeah.
trying to solve for the echo right now. Yeah, I'm just trying to get better.
Oh, okay.
Is there a teenager, anybody to call?
I like you just went to get ours.
Anybody under 40?
It's not going to matter. It's not going to.
Is there anybody else that like the microphone? Actually, how do you? Yeah, that's actually.
The room, oh, there you go. The room is mic'd. Mute, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Marta. We can't hear you guys online if you can hear in person.
The room is on mute again.
Yes, thank you. We were just trying to see if we could make the video.
I think your sound right is going to crash.
Again?
Yeah, because there's the echo.
Okay.
So yeah, it's, you can see biochar is only at 5% of our top line revenue, which is a relatively low percentage of our overall. But it is a very, very useful product. The still echoing really badly.
It's okay, Carl. You sound like Lou Gehrig.
I think it's called a speech jammer when you hear yourself. Yeah, so in addition to the remediation markets that we work in, I've also been working to scale the use of biochar in agriculture and some other markets. One of those markets is essentially treating large areas of ground with a high percentage of biochar compost. That increases water holding and therefore defensible space. So you can cut down on the irrigation needs for, having a lawn or having to start building and maintain green grass, which provides, good sensible space and not vegetable wildfire. So the other things that we've done with it, and are finding a good deal of success with are treating them with manure lagoons. So we've done lagoons essentially dose and, greatly cut down the amount of methane that the lagoons, open lagoons, produce, while also tripling the nutrient value coming out of those. So farmers require a lot less, nutrient.
I just took my computer out of the mix.
Okay.
Michael's in charge. He's slide advance me now.
Looks like that's the end of this presentation. Okay, there's anything in here. Anyway, I'd be happy to answer any other questions about biochar online, but it is a very nice emerging market. And to talk about our journey through the PERMA contracting, I'd like to introduce Greg Blair.
People online, can you still not hear us?
Bart is on mute. I think she's trying to talk to us.
We can hear you guys. It's
Okay.
not,
Okay.
right, it's not amazing, but we can hear you.
All right, are we echoing still? Okay. Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. It serves us right for trying to show a video in the middle of a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm Greg Blair. I'm the managing partner, the majority owner of Biomass One. I've been involved with the project since 1984, when it was first presented to me as a project financing opportunity when I was a young banker operating out of New York. I ended up coming to the project in 1991. The project commenced commercial operation in December of 1986 and commenced its 25-year, 25 megawatt power purchase agreement, the first agreement the plant had. Under its original configuration as a 25 megawatt project with 2 boilers and 2 steam turbines. One was a 15 megawatt GE turbine, fully condensing turbine, high efficiency, and the other turbine was a 10 megawatt extraction turbine manufactured by BBC. And that was to serve a steam customer that was co-located on the property, White City Dry Kiln. And in 2006, there was an opportunity to upgrade the plant from an efficiency standpoint. Just on fuel efficiency alone, there was a twin turbine that was acquired at the outset of development that was stored in a warehouse. It was basically a 2-for-1 deal. If you want one, you got to buy 2. And it came out of a nickel mine in British Columbia that had gone out of business. So this is the turbines are 1968 vintage GE turbines, which are the same efficiency as brand new GE turbines for the most part, steam turbines, because those particular model steam turbines haven't changed a whole lot. But the interesting oddity of this is that in 2006, we were able to install a second GE turbine on the turbine deck and pay for its installation in 2 years, just with fuel savings, with fuel priced at $32 a month by ton. And that paid for a $2.4 million installation cost of that turbine. Since we already owned the turbine, it was a rather low cost installation. So now we actually have 2 boilers and 3 turbines. The 10 megawatt BBC turbine remains in place, but we're not using it. It's been valved off, and Pacific Port does not want us to operate all turbines at the same time because we are, our transmission interconnect is designed and built and has been studied for the export of up to 30 megawatts of power. And so we are rated at 30 megawatts gross, and it turns out that our cruising speed is optimal at 28 to 28 and a half megawatts. That's where the plant likes to live. So I was not involved in the negotiation of the first PPA, but I certainly had a chance to review it as a young lender. And that project, that PPA had start off pricing at, I think it was around $45. I don't have my computer on right now, and I'd have to dig through the archives of that to find out what that specific price was, but it was in the low forties. And that contract finished out in 12/31/2011 at $160 a megawatt hour. And so that's 15 years ago. The contract we're operating under right now was signed and in December of 2011, with expiration on December 31st, 2011. Pacific Corp liked to do things, kind of right up to the deadline back then. And we commenced operating under that contract. Well, basically continued operating, and at New Year's Eve at midnight, we commenced a new contract, and that price was $69. The actual avoided cost was in the low 50s, high 40s on peak and off peak. And Pacific Corp was able to see the forward curve on the avoided cost pricing metrics as having the potential to levelize the rates and bring back-end rates forward on a loan structure. And we actually saw that they were working with us on a very, very forthwith basis that we were grateful for. They only charge 5% interest rate in a commercial interest rate environment that really should have been around 8 or 9 or more for a project like us with no fuel contracts and project finance risk, et cetera. So Pacific Corp was working with us. They decided that we were an important capacity resource in Southern Oregon. And more importantly, they said, we believe that many of our customers in Southern Oregon are highly dependent on you, our industrial customers. And our industrial customers are important to Pacific Corp because they are baseload customers who buy power 24/7 at a steady rate. And, residential customers are great. That's why one of the main reasons we exist, but residential customers turn things on in the morning and then turn them off and go to work and come home and turn a whole bunch of stuff on when they get home from work and then turn it off at 10 o'clock or midnight or whatever when they go to bed. And then the load drops at night. Whereas a mill that's running 3 shifts is going to have pretty consistent load during the day. So a baseload plant and baseload industry kind of are, our best bedfellows for grid health and grid management. And then residential loads can be better managed with a certain amount of baseload power that matches the residential base. And then you manage the swings with peaking plants or now batteries. The new PPA rates that are on the deck right now, I think they were just introduced or presented to the PUC by Pacific Corp for 2026 are $49, $4 higher than when I approved got approval for the construction loan in 1984. I was brought on by the owners of the plant as a banker who had switched over to consulting in 1991 because they were losing $3 million a year, operating the plant under a power contract that between 87 and 91 had moved from $49 to $52. And the price of biomass fuel at the time was $43 a bone dry ton. So you can't put $43 in, but a bone dry ton at $43, which makes a megawatt at about $48, and put it in a boiler and expect to make any money when the price of power is $48. So I basically said, even notwithstanding the fact that there was fairly low labor cost, it was properly organized. I saw some problems with the fuel market. I said the fuel market has gotten used to commoditizing wood waste. That which those who once regarded it as a waste that was priced at $9 when this plant was not operating are now valuing it at $42 because you're competing with D.R. Johnson, with Wheelbrader, and with everybody else in the universe that was operating at that point in time. And so I looked at the market and I said, well, I have no interest in this plant going out of business for the owners at that point. I have no interest in seeing Bill Carlson go out of business at Wheelbrader. I see no interest and no power to influence the future of D.R. Johnson and no desire to see anybody go out of business. I said the solution to this problem is to find more fuel. And so we started with opening a wood yard across the street from the plant with a reprocessing facility that could handle log yard waste and sort it out and set down non-combustibles. We developed a big program that competed with the local landfill and provided construction bins to molding shops, furniture makers, and people doing roof tear downs or any kind of landscape debris projects at half the cost that the landfill was charging for a general use bin. We opened up this community wood yard, as I say, paved landscape that made it user friendly so that people could drop off wood waste on their way to work. And we invested in a fleet of tub grinders that could be deployed in the woods and go out and gather slash piles. All of these ideas were not Greg Blair ideas. These ideas were sitting down with the employees and the management at the company at the time and saying, where is wood that isn't coming from a mill? And that answer came from, it's here, it's there, it's here. How do we get it? How do we organize? Can we get it at a reasonable price? And can we turn it into fuel that is cheaper than the most expensive fuel that we buy from the mills? And that was the process of working down the price of fuel over a 2-year period and educating the highest price mill supplier that we didn't need his fuel at that price because we had created other sources. And, my fuel buyer at the time was concerned, well, he's just gonna go to DR Johnson. I said, well, he'll go to DR Johnson and their yard will fill up with his material. And they're going to have to displace when their yard gets filled, they're gonna look at their most expensive supplier and say, well, we don't need you anymore. And that guy's gonna go look. And maybe he'll end up at Bill's plant down in Wheelbrader. But in any event, the market is gonna work out because the supply will exceed the demand. This all came about by asking simple questions and saying, how many mills have opened in the last 5 years? Well, no new mills have opened, and how many shift changes have occurred? Well, really no major shift changes. The amount of waste produced by the mills hasn't changed. How many new biomass plants have opened that are consuming, or how many sawmill or board manufacturing boilers are operating that weren't operating before? No. So I'm looking at a market where the demand and supply hasn't changed. My undergraduate degrees in economics, I said, you have a market that's short, and the only way that condition, that equilibrium is going to, or that condition is going to be restored to equilibrium or reversed into an oversupply condition is if somebody goes out of business or we find more supply. So that's what we did. We did all of that. And then we approached the utility about an arbitrage concept called the non-generation agreement. Why are we delivering you power at $49 when you can buy it for $9 on the open market when Bonneville is producing power at a price well below our cheapest source of fuel? And so we're able to engineer a program with them that was selected on an annual basis where they actually paid us to shut down. That particular structure was akin to a capacity payment. We basically got a capacity payment on a selective year-by-year basis if the market conditions, the relationship between the price of fuel and the price of electricity matched up during those low-cost months. So that's kind of where we are on a power contracting basis, and now we're staring $49 in the face. Okay, our current price right now under this contract in 2026 is $89. Our top line of revenue is 20 million. Our bottom line last year was minus 200,000. So we lost money with 20 million of revenue. It wasn't entirely the fault of the contract. We had some operational difficulties early in the year. Normally, with a $20 million top line, I would expect a 5% bottom line. So if our margin's 5%, you're talking about reducing our revenue almost in half. It doesn't take anybody, no one has to be a genius to figure out what happens. We can't operate. So we looked and said, well, what happened? At one point, we're paying Oregon ratepayers 15 years ago, we're paying $160 for the same power. In 2007, 19 years ago, they were paying $148 a megawatt hour. And in my last conversation with Pacific Corp, where we proposed some pricing around 110, they said, oh my gosh, that's so expensive. And how are we going to justify that to the ratepayers? I said, well, you can't as a utility and as an electric price necessarily when you're comparing it to solar, when you're comparing it to wind, when you're comparing it to combined cycle natural gas, because we are not those technologies. But do any of those technologies go out and gather slash piles in the woods that would otherwise be open burn? Do any of those plants go out to area landfills with their grinding equipment and save those landfills airspace and permitting, re-permitting for new landfill construction? Because we're gathering all the clean waste that they are segregating because they think that it's a win-win. Oh boy, we get to collect the tipping fee and we don't have to consume airspace. What a deal for them. But it's a deal. Landfills are community resources and nobody wants a landfill near them. So we feel like we're helping them out as well. the biochar business, we are the preeminent leader of the biomass industry in the United States right now. In terms of innovation, we were one of the first actors, and we were the first company, the first large-scale industrial producer of biomass prior to our emergence on the scene. Biomass was something that Bob made in a kiln in his backyard in Colorado. Biochar, sorry. What did I say? Biomass, oh, yeah, right, meant biochar. Okay, I think we can move on a slide. The next ones will be quicker, I promise.
Well, I want to touch on what the new PPA also triggers in terms of capital.
Oh, yes. So as part of the regional haze study that was mandated by EPA several years ago, it was determined that because we are a stationary source and we produce NOx, that we might be a contributor to regional haze at wild and scenic places that were the subject of regional haze consideration. We signed a SAFO in, I think, 2021 that required us to install feasible NOx mitigation technology prior to signing a new PPA. We've identified a couple of technologies, one of which is infeasible, and that's selective catalytic reduction, because it involves burning natural gas and involves introducing a catalyst at the back end of an electrostatic precipitator, and there is always going to be some particulate loading that is going to affect that catalyst. And because of the variety of materials that we burn, there could be some punking out of catalyst and premature retirement of catalyst because of chemicals that might be in ply trim or board furnish or other materials that we receive from the mills. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I missed this. So you're operating under a PPA right now that expires when?
Christmas, on New Year's Eve this year. Yeah. So yeah, our concerns are rather immediate. The other thing I will speak to, so yeah, it triggers that investment. So one of the things that we've incorporated in our conversations with PacifiCorp is how do we pay for this? And what we proposed is pricing structures where, again, this is my banking history, even if we have a new PPA, we're a biomass plant that has been in operation for 40 years, but doesn't have an enforceable fuel supply agreement. The enforceable fuel supply agreement in the eyes of the financial community is Georgia Pacific signing a long-term agreement where they say, I am going to supply you with 40,000 tons a year at $12 a ton that escalates at this rate. Okay, GP's not signing that, IP's not signing that, Timber Products isn't signing it, Boise Cascade's not signing it. They say, we don't know how much we're going to produce next year. We don't know if we're going to own this plant or operate this plant 5 years from now. We hope to. But we're not putting our balance sheet behind an obligation to sell a waste to you that helps you get financing. You have to figure out another way. Unfortunately, there aren't any, Wild West lenders like I was back in the late 80s when I took a risk on this thing, venture capital, did a long-term mortgage. So what we've suggested is the ratepayers we either have to find financing that is either through a loan guarantee, a green bond, or we incorporate it into a capacity payment upfront and basically load up the capacity payment for 2 years, phase in the installation of this for 2 years, and take advantage of, at least on a federal level, bonus depreciation, so that excess revenue can be reinvested. The state of Oregon, unfortunately, as of recently, bonus depreciation has been suspended or done away with. So we would have to ask for even more money from the ratepayers to cover the income taxes that we would have to pay to the state of Oregon. And then we would give it back to, so the state we would borrow money or get money from the ratepayers and then give it to the state in terms of taxes. So there's a little bit of a circuitous thing, and us paying taxes is not like Nike paying taxes. It's like that comic strip, I forget the name of it, back in the 1960s, but I've identified the enemy and he is us. So we are the taxpayer, and a tax on the ratepayer is a tax on the taxpayer. So anyway, this isn't a policy discussion about tax policy.
Yeah, that's a different group.
That's a different group. That's tomorrow's meeting, right? So one of the things, avoided cost pricing, limits biomass, it's been geared around the next unit. The next unit is solar with a battery. Solar with a battery, actually, the latest pricing that came out, not bad. We're still more expensive, but it's actually coming closer to us, because batteries are not cheap. Batteries are 4-hour batteries. So you gather sunlight, make electricity during the day, you charge your battery, and then you discharge it during a 4-hour period that you hope matches up with the period when demand peaks. That's great. We have a 2-month to 4-month battery. Right now, I have 85,000 tons that Darren has purchased, and the company has paid for. It's sitting out in our pile, and that represents 4.5 months of operation of 4.25 months of operation of Biomass 1. So that's 17 weeks of power generation. So if fuel shut down entirely, if all the roads were consumed by floods or Armageddon type action, we can still operate for 4.5 or 4 months and without a drop of fuel coming in. We could also withstand major storms, disruptions to supply, because there's always going to be fuel coming in, and we maintain that kind of inventory because we buy fuel when it's most opportunistic to do so. We buy fuel over a long period of time because it enables us to homogenize the fuel from various sources. So one particular source of fuel does not overcome its characteristics, don't overcome it, makes it easier for our boiler operators to control the plant. So there's a lot of good things about it. Our non-energy benefits, Kirk went to great lengths and explained a lot of it. As I said, we're the only biochar company, producer, the first to industrialize biochar. The community woodwork. We run a masticator that goes after low-lying, lower-level stuff and offer that as a local service as well for homeowners on the urban-wild interface. We have the grinder program that goes out and does the landfill tours and the slash piles. What else are we doing? So we're also cleaning up the air because we're bringing in a lot of waste that would otherwise be open burned, and we're basically importing pollution from the woods, treating it, reducing it, and producing electricity from it. And there is the one benefit, the carbon benefit and the pollution benefit that no one talks about, that's difficult to measure, is that conventional 24/7 baseload plant that mirrors our generating profile that's throttling back and producing fewer emissions. We do have some truck emissions. I think our parametrics folks are going to talk to the balance of that. They've done some very, very specific mileage discussions about what happens with fuel and what happens if we go away. And I think we are best understood in the absence of us. It's always good to understand, like, well, what are these guys really what they say they are? Well, we've got some scenarios to share with you of what happens if we shut down, and what happens if we were never around. The other thing is we are deeply embedded in the wood timber economy locally. Okay, we say we have 85 to 87 employees. The low number is in the high 70s. That's not an inefficient plant. That would be if they were all plant employees. We were on the plant with 4 employees. One guy on the control board, 2 men walking around the plant doing tasks and maintaining things and clearing jams on the fuel conveyors, and whatever the control room tells them is a problem, they address it. There's 2 men for safety. And there's 1 man on the pile in a loader moving fuel from the pile onto our conveyor systems. And that is a 24/7 operation. There are another 7 to 9, depending on the time of the year, full-time maintenance people who work 5 days a week and are there to perform major maintenance in between and work tickets that come up of things that are broken, where we've had to go on to a backup system or a secondary system. We have a lean office staff of 2 or 3 people managing all these other businesses that we have, in addition to all the fuel contracts that we have. And we have the rest of the employees are either working in fuel acquisition with the grinders, in the reprocessor operation across the street, driving trucks, etc. So our plant is no less efficient from a labor standpoint than any other plant. We just happen to have more employees because we're doing more things with employees that involve mostly the acquisition and management of fuel.
So we've got a couple of barriers that are a little bit different than what you heard. Thank you, Greg.
Yep.
Don't have the same interconnection challenge, although we did hear from Pacific that if for some reason we were not able to extend or execute a new PPA before the end of, before the, New Year's, we would have to go back to the beginning of the interconnection queue. That's crazy, but that's what we heard.
Shannon, can you move near to the mic?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
We've talked a little bit about the monetization that's getting on the procurement side, not so much the space that y'all work in, but if we do need to take on a bigger, more public discussion about this, I hope that you're all now well informed, that it makes sense in our energy policy to pay for the attributes that energy brings to it. Prevent the small scale renewable certification though, there is a premium that utilities are allowed to pay for small scale renewables. This should be a small scale renewable. However, there's been some problems securing that certification. As Greg mentioned, when they started up the facility, there was a steam code use for the thermal byproduct use. In the definition of small scale renewables, specifically around biochar, it calls out that they need to have a thermal co-product. And when we went to Department of Energy and said, do you do this? And we went to DEQ and said, do you sign the certificate? We went to PUC and said, do you sign the certificate? Nobody is in a position to say, yeah, we can sign that certificate. Pacificor needs that to pay us that premium and we can't get there yet. We believe that biochar is a thermal co-product. And we need to get across that finish line. So that's one of the barriers that we need to overcome pretty quickly before we can get a new contract. The wildfire suppression and mitigation, just thinking about those different fuel economies when we speak with our friends here in forestry, natural resources, and DEQ also recognize the environmental attributes. They say, can't you take more out of the woods? Well, maybe, but it's expensive. So if that really is a desire to do things like that, it sounds like D.R. Johnson is having productive conversations with some of the folks. So maybe there's a there. Maybe there are some funds that can go, or maybe we can look at some mechanisms that could take funds that go to fighting a fire, which I hear are about 8 times more expensive than mitigating or preventing a fire. And those that societal value recognition. So as Greg said, this just to put it in like real, he's great at throwing around numbers, obviously, but I thought it would be just helpful if we just kind of put this in simple terms. Takes about $110 a megawatt to make it right now, and we're being offered about 55. So there's a revenue gap there. Over on the side, those are the different things that we're looking at, like how can we bridge that gap with what are these different attributes of this resource that we have that we could stone soup together to keep this thing whole. Those prices that I just showed you don't include the capital expense that needs to happen once that brings us up to about $128 a megawatt. Just on the particulate side and some upgrades that they would like to make once they get a new contract. And then bringing in the NOx, that brings us up to about $140 a megawatt. So just, but if we're gonna rate base it, okay, that's a solution. Are there other finances? Is there some kind of an innovative grant program? If that could take some of that bite or the sting out of that CapEx, that's awesome. So that's another area that we're looking for ideas for how to cover that CapEx. Yeah.
The small scale renewable certification, how does that play into the price here?
There's an 8%, it doesn't, oh, the avoided cost, yes. There's an 8% adder that is in avoided cost calculations for small scale renewables. So whatever their standard proxy is that we're being compared against, they'll give us another 8% on top of that with that certification. good question.
Well, there's also a new RFP coming out. We submitted a non-conforming bid to the last RFP. And we were non-conforming on two bases. One was with 30 megawatts, the limit on biomass is 20. Somehow they want to set a limit that pushes you more toward this economies of scale. But more importantly, I think it was due to they didn't want biomass plants overrunning the small scale renewable. And, 5 or 6 50 megawatt plants could consume all of the volume. I think we were one of the few plants that were bidding into this. The other non-conforming was, we didn't identify yet whether biochar, we could not identify or certify that biochar was a thermal use. So we submitted our pricing anyway, and they said, okay, this is good. It's a good start so that we can understand what you want. They were trying to get a bilateral deal done where Pacific Corp doesn't have to worry about PUC approval. They can sign it under their authority as, basically they can sign executory contracts. The only concern is, will this contract be included in rate base? Because of the pricing we submitted, they were like, oh, wait a minute, I think we need to go through the RFP process formally so that we know ahead of time when we sign that it has been approved for inclusion in the rate base, because this is one of the more expensive forms of generation. So those are the sequential things that we need to determine. So we looked at it and said, we could export steam if somebody told us how much we need to, and we could build a greenhouse and we could grow strawberries and produce less electricity and less biochar, or no biochar and grow strawberries. But the state of Oregon needs to tell us, do you want strawberries or do you want biochar? Do you want electricity or do you want avocados? And we think that, what we're doing right now is in the best interest of ratepayers and communities and DEQ, frankly, with the wastewater mitigation projects we're doing, the Superfund projects. But if we want to put strawberries into the Superfund site, we can go ahead.
We have to go, Greg.
That's
So
why
I think we've touched on all of these things. We've got some uncertainty around small scale renewable certification. We want to nail that down, and are looking for financing, pollution control upgrades. Are there mitigation credits? Like, what can we do to try and manage that, deal with the CapEx issue as well? So we've got all kinds of things to be thinking about. Let's see, we should. Oh yeah, this is where I want to go. So we're going to give you all a really quick break while our next presenters get ready. Try and be fast. I'm sorry we're going over here. But basically what we did to try and put a finer point on it is, like, we all wave our hands around and go, biomass, it's so good for the economy. It's so good for greenhouse gas emissions, but how good? So we designed a couple of studies and brought on some very qualified contractors to look at multiple scenarios. One, status quo. We're operating magically, there's a new PPA, the price goes up, hallelujah, and we just keep operating. Same mix of fuels and everything. Two, facility closes. What does that look like? What's the economic implication? What's the greenhouse gas criteria, air pollutant implication of that? 3 months of operations. Why 3 months? If you look at the open energy market right now, there's 3 months of the year that we can beat that price. The others, not so much. We got to figure something out there. So what would that look like? That would certainly impact the fuel supply and that whole integrated relationship. Then the NOx controls installed, so that's status quo, and we get over the hump, figure out the CapEx. And then an increased inwards / consumption. That's because of some of the preliminary reactions we had from folks saying, no, don't close. We want you to take more of this out of the woods. So what would that look like? So let's take a quick 3-4 minute, 5-minute max break, and then we'll get our next presenters up and they can show us what they discovered.
1859 is the bathroom.
1776, that's the code.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Better than me.
This is, I've heard this conversation. I've been pretty immersed in the last, especially last week. That's right. Both planning groups, a lot of these things that I've never been interested in this.
Yes.
We met, I toured the plant.
Yes.
Greg and myself. Meeting.
Yeah, and then we want to.
Vast.
Screen box of
Not
ideas.
specifically.
Because I think. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah.
So I was pretty well.
Okay, well then talk. So you're not.
Yeah, and then, where do you have used to be?
Sorry about that.
But
Then forthcoming, what not yet completed, are other community benefits that have been talked about today as well. So we don't have results yet from those. So the 5 scenarios Shannon already covered. They differ based on the length of operation. So whether it's year round or reduced operation during that 3-month window when power prices are high and generation is low from other sources. And then 2 scenarios, D and E, that are year-round operations, same fuel demand, same electricity generation, but different air pollutant controls in D, and in E, increased supply coming from inwood slash. So this slide highlights our assumptions and our estimate of where fuel is coming from. What's the demand from the facility and where is it coming from? So scenario A is status quo. So in this, you see that the dark blue is for manufacturing facilities. The medium blue is inwood slash, and the lightest blue is the yard or other deliveries to Biomass 1. So that's currently the fuel mix, and it's about 213,000 bone dry tons annually. So you can see it's the same volume we're looking at. We're just looking at different disposition of those fuels under different scenarios. So we got a scenario B, facility no longer is operating. There is no demand. What happens to that 213,000 bone dry ton of fuel? The top orange is the in woods material currently sourced that we assume is burned in woods rather than going to a biomass facility. The black, it's black because it's kind of a black box. Where is that fuel going to go? We don't really know. There's not really a demand for it. We don't know where it's going to go. It could go to the landfill. Manufacturers may stop producing because they don't have a place to put their material. Or potentially some of them could go to alternative markets. So it's kind of the unknown black space, right? Scenario C, we still have a lot of black unknown disposition of material because we're only operating for 3 months, so our demand's a lot lower. We have the same demand for the yard as in the status quo. So we still are pulling about the same amount of green material from urban areas and things like that. We have the same amount of inwoods burning as under scenario B. We assume all of it is burned. It's currently consumed by Biomass 1 in woods. And then we have a small amount coming from manufacturers. Scenario D, we have the exact same fuel disposition. We just have the NOx controls installed. Scenario E, increased inwood slash. We source more from the woods and less from manufacturers. So those are kind of our, yeah.
In scenario C, you're saying that you would stop your operations for collecting wood from in forest.
So yes, that's what we're assuming in that scenario, just based on costs and other factors. And Darren could talk more to that if you want to. Any other questions on? Yeah.
This assumes that the industry will produce, logging will keep the same production in all scenarios.
So we looked at, well, no, actually. It's a short answer. I'll talk about it a little bit more as we go.
Okay, my role here. I don't know how many folks are familiar with the timber industry in the Northwest, but over the last particularly 6 years, significant portion of the markets for byproducts have disappeared, pulp and paper particularly, for sawdust, shavings, and chips. And the tragedy of this week is probably not going to help that any because that was one of the largest consumers in the Northwest. If you're not familiar with what happened in Longview. And so there's a lot of folks right now that are relying on Biomass 1 to take the byproducts. And Barbara will get into it, but there's a significant amount of wood manufacturing facilities in the 5-county region that were analyzed. And some of those are engineered wood, such as plywood and LVL, that don't have a lot of homes for their byproducts. And so Biomass 1 is very important to them. And if you are not familiar with the process, about half of the log that goes into a manufacturing facility ends up with byproducts in bark, shavings, sawdust, chips, and then when you get to the plywood manufacturing, you got ply trim and others. And so Biomass 1 is serving as an important home for those byproducts at this point. And there's more There's need for more homes for the byproducts in that 5-county region at this point. Some of it's leaving, but leaving the area. But, and what we calculated is that of the wood product production in that 5-county area, the companies that represent 75% of that production are currently relying on Biomass One to dispose of some of their byproducts. So fairly important, as Barbara said, we don't know where they would go if they don't have Biomass One. And, you know, we do a lot of work in the wood products business, and a lot of the work that we do in the wood products business right now is people calling us to ask, what can we do with byproducts? And we don't have the best solutions in the world, unfortunately, and Biomass One's pretty important to the region.
Can you define what the 5-county area is again?
Yeah, Josephine, Jackson, Douglas, Klamath, and Curry. And Biomass One sources also some from Lane County and further afield, but the vast amount of product comes from those 5.
First of all, I'm sorry, I missed introductions. I'm Jim Carmack. I'm the Oregon State Director for USDA Rural Development. And so I've been working a lot with Biomass One on financing and DR Johnson on financing and with the Forest Service. 2 points and then I'll shut up. This problem is only going to get worse. The Forest Service, Steve can back this up. Forest Service and BLM are both going to are increasing production now. And that's going to happen. It is happening. So this problem is not going away. It is not static. It is getting worse. And just for a real life example, I was in a mill 2 weeks ago and in their yard, just, you know, I can't even describe how a football sized yard full of chips and sawdust and everything else. And right now their only outlet is Biomass One. And I said, what happens if this goes away? Because it's not a secret. And the guy, his face went white and he was like, I have no idea. So, just, you know, real pointed, real direct example.
And to that point, that facility is not even in the.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not in, it's in Deschutes County, right? Or
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Deschutes.
Is Deschutes, yeah, barely in Deschutes, that's right. So it's not even in that 5-county spread. And then their only outlet is Biomass.
Is it in Klamath? I'm sorry. It is in Klamath. My apologies.
Oh, no.
It's not very far in the.
Yeah, it's on the border.
But those of you that live around the Willamette Valley may have been able to see some of this over the last few years, because if you drive around, all of a sudden there's farms that got mounds of sawdust because sawmills didn't have anywhere to take it. And if you grow blueberries or anything else, people were taking it in, and once they said, yeah, we'll take some, they probably got it.
So just as a quick example, if a facility says, okay, I can't send it to Biomass One.
Closer to the.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for the reminders there. If a facility says, okay, I can't send it to Biomass One, what if I send it to the landfill? And this just gives you kind of like some simplified economics of what that looks like for a facility. So on average, across all of its fuel supply, Biomass One's paying $20 a bone dry ton. The Dry Creek landfill, just up the road from Biomass One, which is where most of this material would go if it went to a landfill, charges $81 a bone dry ton for the tipping fee. That's a difference in $100 a bone dry ton for a facility. And several of the people that we talked to said there is no way they could do this and still maintain profitability of their facility. So it just kind of gives you a little for that potential option. Yes.
The question on that. Did you talk to the landfill if they could take on that level of waste?
We did.
And they were okay, I mean.
So we're planning to have follow-up conversations with them, but we told them the amount and they said we could handle that. The question is for how long, and it's one thing to ask someone on the phone, but before they've really thought it through.
Yeah.
So we're planning on having a few follow-up conversations, but yeah.
And they're pricing themselves lower and taking waste from Lane County down to Dry Creek right now. So that capacity that Lane County has is going to move towards that as long as that price is lower, which limits the space in Dry Creek.
And which also means this price may change.
Yeah. Can I add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
You talked about the revenue stream for folks in the wood manufacturing business. And if you look long-term, sometimes, a lot of times, particularly when people were able to sell their byproducts regularly, the profitability of a lot of facilities wasn't a lot different than what the revenue stream was of the byproducts. And right now, you probably have noticed that the wood products industry has been suffering. Markets aren't very good, but not having a revenue stream from your byproducts is also very detrimental. And so to add further to that, not helpful for sure.
And I would also add one thing. So I mentioned earlier that our total revenue is $20 million. The 200, if you take 220,000 tons a year and multiply it by $100, you get a dollar figure that exceeds our revenue stream. Which means either the electricity is free or the disposal of the waste is cheap. But the economy is benefiting from our participation on that level. And if we were to turn around and charge landfill tipping fees to everyone we buy fuel from, if they were able to pay it as if we were shut down and looked at that as a probable solution, we wouldn't have to charge for the electricity. So it is kind of an interesting relationship, but take away, Barbara.
So as I promised, I'll be quick on methods and data. I keep wanting to hold my hand. I can't look at you guys and the slides. So there were two different aspects of our analysis. The first one, what does it do to jobs and income from an economic development perspective and a community perspective? And from that, the main type of analysis that we do is regional economic modeling, and we use a software called InPlan, if you're familiar with that. So this looks at how does a change in one industry, such as biomass, ripple out in all the other industries in an area. And those are known as indirect and induced effects. And it's based on supplier relationships and based on if I work at Biomass One and I get I can support my family on that income, and I spend all my earnings in the community on my house and my food, all of those other areas of the community benefit. So that's what the indirect and induced effects do. So we, to get information to understand how do we analyze the effects of Biomass One, we interviewed 17 of their fuel suppliers, and that represents about 70% of the fuel supply annually to Biomass One. So we were really trying to get a handle on this question of what happens to their byproduct, what happens to the fuel, where does it go, how are they impacted, because that's the main source of economic impact. Biomass One operations and its employees and their income is super important, but it's actually quite small compared to all the manufacturers, 75% in this 5-county area that send their byproduct. What's going to happen to them? That was like the main part of our question on this piece. We assumed current conditions in the wood residuals market. Steve and I went down a number of rabbit holes trying to figure out, well, if this happens and this happens, and then we finally said, we're going to look at current conditions. And then we ended up looking at two extremes. One is all the material goes to the landfill. We know that's not going to happen. We know it's not economically feasible for most of the manufacturers, but it's sort of one bookend, like this is one extreme. What's that look like? The other extreme is they all go out of business that send their residuals. We know that's not going to happen either. Some of them will find an alternative market. Some of them may create their own facility to dispose of it. We don't really know, but we know it's not going to be all of them going out of business. But what we did model was what would it look like if that 75% of the sawmill, plywood, and engineered wood products, if the percent of those companies that are sending some residual to Biomass One, what is their economic contribution and what's at risk if Biomass One closes? So we're not saying all of it's going away, but we did analyze what's that amount of jobs and income supported by those industries. And then finally, we looked at the value of the change in emissions that parametrics analyzed in terms of the NOx and the particulate matter in particular that would be emitted in all the different scenarios. So any questions on how we did what we're now going to present to you before I dive into results? Okay. So these are some really big numbers. If we look at closure, so we compare everything to status quo operations. If Biomass One closes, there are in the 5-county area nearly 9,000 jobs and nearly 683 million that's supported by, that's linked with Biomass One. Again, we're not saying all of these are going away with closure, but all of these are at risk because those facilities, 97% of this is the manufacturing facilities, the wood products facilities and all of their ripple effects. If biomass one goes away, they have a problem. Everyone that we talked to said, whoa, I don't really know what we would do. We'd have to figure it out, or we might have to close, or, you know, this is a real problem for them that they would have to solve. In terms of the air quality, with closure, there's no longer the NOx emissions that we're talking about abating with the $26 million investment. There's also more particulate matter, the fine particulate matter emitted because of the increase in woods burning and generation elsewhere. The trade-off between those is we have a cost of more PM 2.5 and we have a benefit of lower NOx emissions. It slightly gets offset where we have slight benefits in this scenario. In terms of greenhouse gas, because of increased generation from other sectors, we have a cost of 11 to 41 million. And I do want to say, in terms of the dollar per ton values that we use for health benefits for greenhouse gases, many of you may know that the federal government is no longer putting dollar values on these. There's uncertainty that I want to just acknowledge in both what that dollar value is in terms of avoided health costs. There's uncertainty and what the cost of climate change will be in the future. We know there are these costs. We don't know the exact dollar value. So I included ranges here. And the federal government, I just want to acknowledge they're no longer, like EPA is no longer putting dollar values on these. For a little more detail, in terms of the employment supported by Biomass One, that nearly 8,800 jobs, about half are in the manufacturing sector. You see that far exceeds it, and most of those jobs are in the wood product manufacturing. This represents 22% of all manufacturing jobs in that 5-county area. So it's a really big chunk of fundamental economic activity in that area. And then it spills into all the other sectors because economic activity in manufacturing supports jobs elsewhere. So that was closure versus status quo. If we operate for 3 months of the year, we have less of a job loss, right? We're still demanding some material from those manufacturing facilities. This is just a linear proportional analysis, 3 months versus no months. We're hovering around zero. We don't know if it's a slight cost or a slight benefit with health costs because of the change in the emissions. And we still have greenhouse gases that are being generated in other electricity utility generation. So we have costs still for greenhouse gas. Now we move to the scenario where nothing changes in terms of fuel sourcing, but we install the capital equipment to reduce the NOx emissions. So we have no change in jobs income that are analyzed, but we have a large benefit in terms of avoided healthcare costs from reduced NOx emissions. And that we think is in the range of 10 to maybe 13 in terms of a benefit cost ratio. When you look at the present value over 30 years of what those emissions would avoid in terms of healthcare costs. And then for the final scenario, we're looking at moving from 6% of the supply coming from inwood slash to 24%. And there's a trade-off here. So sort of similar to the other scenarios, when we decrease supply coming from the manufacturers, again, we don't think all of those will go out of business, but we just showed here if all of those were to cease manufacturing at the same rate as in the other scenarios in terms of the relationship of reduction in bone dry ton to jobs and income supported, there would be a net loss of jobs because of that reduced demand for manufacturing sectors. We get a slight bump because we have jobs of collecting and hauling from the woods, as I think, Michael, you were talking about. There's costs there and there's employment and income from that. So we get a slight bump up, but we have a large loss in the manufacturing sector. And then we have a large benefit in terms of health and a small benefit in terms of greenhouse gas. I think I kind of raced through those.
Why the larger benefit in terms of health?
Because of primarily the small particulate matter. Yeah, so it's assumed in this scenario that it would be burned in woods if not going to biomass one. And particulate matter, that fine particulate matter has a really high health cost. And this is using EPA's values for slash burning, which are lower because it's more rural. And I don't know enough about air chemistry, but the health effects from slash burning are less than some other types of NOx emissions. So this per ton value is lower than for some other NOx emission sources. And that's the summary of what we just discussed.
I have a question, probably for Greg. Is, let's say the scenario, and we face the same thing, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying. Let's say that we do all go away. We're all gonna realize, or as a whole, that we have to come back. Let's say in 2 years from now. What would the cost be of bringing everything back up and restarting again, bringing people back to work? What's the reality of it? Because if we go away, if we stop, if we kill our industry, which that kind of seems to be where we're going, and that's why we're here today. We're trying to find ways to keep moving forward and not moving backward. What does that overall cost look like of trying to come back in 2 years or 5 years from now? Because we are going to have to, because then we're going to realize as an economy that we have to be here. That cost, I'm assuming, would be monstrous. Could you take a shot at that?
Well, the unknown is, the poor employees that we've spent, so I think our average tenure of our employees is probably 15 or 20 years. So that amount of institutional knowledge, if you lose it and people take a new position and they move out of the area, it's very hard to get them back. I can tell you right now, filling positions from the local market when we have a vacancy requires us bringing people on at an entry-level position and growing them talent internally and elevating the levels that are just below the people who left. So we grow organically, we train our people. If we're gonna have to start over again, you're much better equipped to deal with this. And this was way.
I'm not going anywhere. So 6 to 24 months just to assemble the labor force. That's assuming that you've laid up the plan correctly and that you're not going to have to do a bunch of testing on systems because all the infrastructure is intact. But even experienced millwrights, experienced boiler operators, experienced electricians all have some learning curve for the local facility, right? I'm sure your facility has its individual unique characteristics, as does every one of them. So the most optimistic timeline is 6 months. It would be 18 months would be a more reasonable expectation.
And it would be a pretty, sorry, go ahead.
And you have to get back to the beginning of the interconnection queue.
Yeah.
Everyone. So
There's that.
let's call it 2 years. I would hate to cut that short, but I do want to have some time for us to kind of workshop some solutions. Tracy is going to guide us through the findings of a parallel analysis, all the same scenarios, but focusing on greenhouse gas and criteria air pollutants.
Yes, thank you. As I mentioned, when we started, I'm Tracy Lunsford. With me is Grace Thurple, also with Parametrics. And we have Josh Proudfoot here too. We're with the Climate and Sustainability Management team, and we looked at the scenarios for greenhouse gas and criteria air pollutant emissions. So we're going to walk through how we did the analysis, a little bit more detail, because I know you all are going to want to get into these details than Barbara went over with the economics analysis. An overview summary of the findings, and then the individual summary results. I know we gave you papers, but we'll get to those. So, the first part is this big colorful picture here. For our analysis, we did a simplified consequential life cycle approach for each scenario, and that shows how changes impact the overall system. And those system boundaries are illustrated in the image that's on the screen, and then for those of you in the room, you have it on your handout too to refer back to. So there's a lot in this picture, and I just want to walk through what it means. Overall, this image shows the flow of materials from feedstock sources to the Biomass 1 facility to where byproducts go, and it shows the benefits and the emission sources in those flows. So if you look on the very left, you can see that we have the Biomass 1 feedstock sources, and these are representative categories summarizing the many sources of feedstocks that Biomass 1 collects. But you can see that there's a wide variety here. Those feedstocks get transported to the Biomass 1 facility where we get electricity generation, biochar production, and then there's a small amount of waste that's produced in mineral ash and slag. That waste gets transported to disposal. And then we also have in the boundaries the transportation of the biochar to its end use as well. And this process leads to both benefits and emissions. So you can see that the operational emissions are shown there in that orange box. Again, that's upstream transportation of the feedstocks to the facility, the operations at the facility, and then the transportation of the byproducts to wherever they're going. And then there are also a lot of benefits that come out of this. And those benefits are really a result of not doing the other thing that could be done if it weren't for Biomass 1. So we've labeled those here the alternative fate pathways. So we see benefits in energy generation as opposed to fossil fuel power generation. We see reduced particulate matter and other criteria air pollutant emissions due to avoiding open pile burning in the forest. We see biochar carbon sequestration that Carl talked about earlier. And we also see that Biomass 1 provides a waste management outlet for the industry. So those alternative fate pathways are listed there in purple, so you can see what those are. And then the associated outcomes of those, again, are increased greenhouse gas emissions, increased health impacts of particulate matter, and other criteria air pollutants, and then just no biochar production, which is a benefit that comes from Biomass 1. So overall within our boundaries, we identify the mix of feedstocks and how they get transported to Biomass 1. We calculate all of the emissions from what happens at Biomass 1, and then we calculate the transportation for wherever the byproducts are going. We count the offsets or the displacement for the other activities that don't happen because Biomass 1 exists. And then we end up with a net scenario emission results. So because I know you all are detail people, a couple more notes. The analysis did focus on anthropogenic emissions. The results we show are kind of an annualized snapshot that's representative of an average year of operations at Biomass 1, because there is a little bit of fluctuation year to year. And then this is a current snapshot. This is a snapshot of the current context. So things may change in the future. We didn't do future forecasting. We looked at the current situation. And then it does exclude impacts that are further down the line, like potential reduction in wildfire emissions resulting from slash fuels reduction. So that is not included in the study. And then, lots of areas where we had to make assumptions, and our goal was really to be conservative and make sure that we were being the most representative we could of what we see happening. So you have this on your flyer throughout the presentation. You can refer back to it if you like. But let's move on to some of the key the first pollutants included. We'll be talking about greenhouse gases in terms of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And we'll be talking about criteria air pollutants in short tons. And in this presentation, we're highlighting NOx and PM 2.5. And so we did study others, but these are the ones that we're highlighting in the presentation. And then I've alluded to, we calculated different types of emissions. So there are avoided emissions for things that didn't happen because biomass 1 exists. There are sequestered emissions that are coming from the long-term carbon storage and biochar. And then there are those produced operational emissions, the transportation operations and the transportation again. And then we put that all together, and that's the emissions profile that you're going to see for each scenario. Okay, are we methodologied out? Any questions there? Okay. Again, we're looking at the same scenarios that we just covered in the economics analysis. So those are, you'll see those all presented in the same way. And then this is the high-level overview of all of the results side by side. You also have that on the other side of your handout for those of you in the room. And as we're going through each scenario, it might be helpful to refer back to this to just see how it compares to the others if you'd like. So our major key takeaways here, Biomass 1 provides greenhouse gas and criteria air pollutant benefits relative to closure. And those benefits are primarily due to avoided power generation for greenhouse gas reductions and avoided pile burning for particulate matter reductions. And current operations do produce NOx. And then the option of increasing inwood slash could increase emissions benefits all around while providing some additional forest services. So those are kind of our key takeaways while we're going through each scenario. And Grace is going to walk us through each scenario and talk about those in more detail.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everybody. Grace Thurfield again from the parametrics team. Happy to share with you a little bit more depth of the scenario results here. So our first scenario is the status quo scenario. And just as a reminder, this includes Inwood's feedstock as 6% of the total fuel mix. This is representing Biomass 1's current operations, and there are currently no NOx facility controls. The way we've presented this is a little bit different from the economics team in that you're seeing kind of the full benefits and emissions of Biomass 1's operations here in this status quo scenario. So we're showing kind of everything that is happening right now in current reality with Biomass 1 operating. And the key takeaways here are that while we're including these avoided and sequestered emissions, there's a significant greenhouse gas and PM 2.5 benefit. And that trend is the same for PM 10 and the other criteria air pollutants other than NOx. And there are trade-offs between these benefits and the NOx emissions that are currently being polluted into the atmosphere. So this is kind of our status quo scenario. And then the way that we're presenting facility closure is that now our benefits and emissions are disappearing because we're assuming that from Biomass 1's perspective, if they're not there, this is just the default macro grid firm power generation assumption. So we're losing all of those benefits and losing the emissions that we had in the status quo. So you can see that big swing from the benefits that they're providing now to that being lost in this closure scenario. And you can see this kind of side by side in your handout as well. And the key takeaways here are that while the NOx emissions would be eliminated if the facility closed, we would lose all of those substantial PM 2.5 and greenhouse gas benefits that we're seeing from their current operations. In the 3-month operation scenario, again, we're assuming this is those peak power months in January, February, and in August when there's low hydropower. And so that's where the price is going to be good enough that Biomass 1 could operate under current PPA negotiations. This assumes 0% inwood slash with otherwise roughly proportional fuel mix. And Biomass 1 would produce 24% of the energy in biochar that they're currently producing. So in this 3-month operational scenario, we do see reduced NOx emissions due to those limited operations. The PM emissions are going to increase from the increase in pile burning in wood, since biomass one is no longer able to use that material in this scenario. And we see a much smaller greenhouse gas benefit due to the increased natural gas and coal power generation at other facilities to make up for that gap. In the NOx control scenario, we see benefits across the board, right? This is assuming that biomass one installs a NOx pollution control device, meeting the DEQ standards, and no other changes from the status quo scenario. So our key takeaways here are that with that device, we have the NOx emissions eliminated, and we see benefits across PM 2.5, all of the criteria air pollutants, NOx, and greenhouse gas. And then finally, with the increase in inwood slash, we're increasing from 6% to 24%, assuming that all other fuel is proportional or reduced proportionally other than agricultural waste due to the high value of the backhaul to California with biochar. And then we're increasing, or that we're including the emissions consequences of the alternative end uses. So for this scenario, we're seeing a significant increase in the benefit for PM 2.5 and avoided emissions from slash piles. That's a difference from the status quo of about 500 short tons. So that's a significant benefit for PM 2.5. NOx might be slightly reduced relative to the status quo, and the greenhouse gas benefit remains significant for this scenario. Yeah.
Okay, so now when you go back to the slide.
Yep.
See an increase in NOx, or is it the same as with the NOx control scenario?
So this is going to be a slight decrease in NOx from the status quo. This is still assuming no NOx control device. We're just changing the fuel mix here to have more inwood slash. Yeah, go ahead.
You see the green bar below the NOx there. Right, that would be the avoided pile burning or slash pile NOx emissions, right? That would be controlled through the device. So the net is actually why the number decreased on the NOx.
But the economic analysis, you were looking at increase with slash with NOx controls installed as well.
No, the reason why there was a benefit on health costs or health benefit was that particulate matter matters more than NOx or in terms of health impact.
Okay.
It's a much more significant difference in the PM 2.5 versus the NOx difference with the increase in inwoods versus the status quo.
You were trying to understand why you got both red and green on the NOx there. When you think this is the net analysis.
No, so let me explain two things. So the NOx is off the stack. Biomass one is the same. But when you increase the slash use and run that through there instead of open burning, that's actually a reduction. Right? So that what we could have done is net it out and just made that orange stack shorter, but we wanted to show you the relative portions. And then on the PM 2.5, public health burden cost is way more intense, an order of magnitude higher than NOx. So NOx has its public health burden cost, but PM 2.5 is at least 10x on public health burden over NOx in dollars. So I mean, one of the factors for that NOx is $30,000 per short ton, but for PM 2.5 it's like 470,000.
But not for inwoods, it's much more.
Right, for inwoods, but in the airshed, if the airshed were the identical airshed in the same population, it would be at that full rate. But you're saying because lower population density, less of it gets to the population. Is that fair?
So both assumed in this scenario, no NOx controls, both the economic and the air. Yeah, long story short. And you all have just gotten ahead of me because we're wrapping up with questions.
Any other understanding questions about the results that you just saw?
Fabulous.
Shannon has
Yeah,
plans around.
may I add one or two things for context?
Absolutely.
Okay, So this is coming from the climate lens, and this is also going into putting on the hat of biomass utilization working group. But with climate change occurring, one of the things that's not in any of this analysis is a uncontrolled wildfire. You're only comparing it to the happy assumption that we're managing fuel to avoid the wildfire. Right? So that is such a dramatic difference in effect. And this is the reason that we're active in this space, is because we don't want to lose our woods and become the Mediterranean. Right? So with the understanding that that fire is going to occur at such a dramatic scale, it's what can we do about it? And what we're telling the story of is just if we're dealing with some of that fuel to avoid the much bigger burn. And just a reminder, the 2023 Alberta wildfire had the same emissions as all of Russia's economy that year with their oil sales, or all of India's economy. And that was one fire in Alberta in a short period of time. Now we've got a whole lot of forest here. So we're looking at a super conservative set of assumptions. And I put that out there because that's the elephant in the room. And that is the default scenario. Thank you.
So we've got 30 minutes to solve these problems.
What do we do with the other 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Right.
I put together some kind of leading questions. I'm sure I didn't think of anything or of everything. I know I thought of a lot of things. But I just thought I'd put some out there to kind of get the juices rolling. And if you think of something that doesn't have anything to do with what I introduce as a question, go ahead and throw it out there. I've been really struck by the lack of consideration in biomass in two really very strong executive orders that were issued at the end of last year. One of them, Executive Order 2526, promoting the resilience of our communities and natural and working lands and waters. In my advocacy, oftentimes I love to work collaboratively with our agencies who are trying to do all the things with increasingly fewer resources to accomplish all of those things, and bring an industry voice or a community perspective or a resource perspective. So as I looked through that executive order, and I know that it names many agencies, and there are agencies in this room that it names, and requires of them to put together plans and present them back to the governor's office to demonstrate how they are going to implement this. So what I did is I just took some samples from two executive orders, one of them the 2526, and I looked at section 2, keep Oregon's working lands and waters working, and thought partnerships to increase the pace and scale of adoption of sustainable stewardship and climate resilient practices by landowners, including federal, local, tribal, business, nonprofit organizations. It strikes me that these biomass facilities land squarely within that, and that we are looking for public and private flexibility. So I'm hearing from the governor's office, yeah, agencies, you should be thinking about how to support facilities like this. Conservation of the lands, that 10% of lands in Oregon restored in 10 years is incredibly aggressive. And these facilities, as we've heard over and over again today, can play a very important role in supporting that restoration work. Innovative mitigation solutions, in lieu fee programs for mitigation obligations. So for some of these problems that we're thinking about, if we're talking about the 10% of the lands in Oregon restored. How do we support these systems? Does it make sense that there are resource investments? I don't know where those resources come from to support their operations. Is there some kind of a mitigation solution that could be considered in lieu of in-place NOx or not? Maybe there's not, but just throwing everything out on the table. With respect to Executive Order 2529, and I would mention that nowhere in there is biomass to energy ever mentioned in that executive order. It's like it wasn't even thought about. The same is true of the Clean Energy Executive Order, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and advancing Oregon's clean energy future. We've just walked through a thorough exploration of how these facilities do both of those things. So if we're trying to support investments in clean electricity infrastructure, strengthen resilience across all levels of the energy system, reducing barriers to clean energy deployment, identifying pathways, I'm just hearing a lot of support and more than that, directive from the executive office to support projects like that. So I'm wondering if there are opportunities for agencies that are directed to put together plans to include these facilities, and if so, what would that look like?
Maybe start. So as part of Executive Order 2529, ODO, along with a few other state agencies, were required to submit quarterly reports to the governor's office on public-private partnership opportunities to advance clean energy solutions. Our first ones was submitted on March 31st, and that was honestly just defining what public-private partnerships are. The executive order overall did not put any funding towards any of these things and really was meant to more dig into the results of the energy strategy. In some places where we might have gone 50 miles wide and 10 inches deep. So that's the majority of the executive order. However, I think there is an opportunity to highlight some of the public-private partnership opportunities with Biomass One and some of our other opportunities for biomass across the state, particularly the partnership between the Forest Service, BLM, and then private companies such as Biomass One and timber companies. So I could see that being a really good opportunity to highlight biomass there.
And if I could add to what Sarah said, I think the intent for 2529 was to include biomass electricity. I mean, the executive order itself didn't list all the technologies for generating electricity. But I think the intent was to include biomass as well as hydroelectric power, natural gas, and all of the opportunities.
I'll also just add, the immediate problem is to solve, D.R. Johnson, for me, the two plants that are up and running. If this can be solved, there is interest around the state in a big way to build new plants, to burn biomass and create electricity. There's tremendous interest in it. And all four corners, three corners.
You know, as the biennial energy report is being refreshed this year, and I know that biomass is one, I wonder if there's an opportunity to look at what Washington State has done in inventorying the different undervalued woody biomass areas and kind of to flag them. Oh, there's one here, oh, Lewis County. Maybe there's something else that could be done there. Do we have anything like that in the state of Oregon that could take this opportunity and put a fine point on it?
Well, I guess in the past, we've looked at, when we looked at other resources for biogas, renewable natural gas, we did an inventory of that. I mean, that could be in the future, we could look at creating an inventory and looking at biomass. I mean, to be honest, if we were looking at biomass as a resource, we'd probably look at it as a solution, maybe for electricity generation, maybe biomass to create clean fuels or other opportunities. So it would probably be part of a larger look at biomass as potential solutions for climate activities. That's certainly something we could look at. in all those things, it's a big report, a lot of research, and so it would cost money. And so it's something we have to put forward to the legislature and see if we get funding for
Okay.
it.
This isn't directly tied to this conversation right now, but Solid Carbon, which is an Oregon company, as well as a number of other companies across the United States, are attempting to solve the issue of replacing coal fly ash and concrete. And they've identified various grades of biomass fly ashes, which can be used to replace not just the fly ash component, the coal fly ash component, but also a portion of the cement component of concrete. And so if you took our plant, for example, the 10,000 tons of mineral rock and sand that goes through our system and gets landfilled would effectively offset about 30,000 tons of CO2 from the cement industry once ASTM has approved this. And that's about 3 or 4 years off. But that's one thing supporting this industry is directly replacing other components of concrete.
I can go back to what I said earlier, is 20 years ago, we were being paid $148 a megawatt hour, which is $30 roughly more than we're asking for now to stay in operation. And if 20 years ago, a ratepayer was nonplussed to pay that bill, and it shows up, I mean, I looked at the effect here, we're 1% of the generation mix in Oregon, so our one plant, and we're the largest standalone biomass plant in the state. And you guys, together with us, you're about 2/3 of our size. So on a cumulative basis, if we were added in at the rates that we're looking to survive, the average ratepayer sees an increase of 50 cents a month for a household. So for the price of a cup of coffee annually, you keep Biomass One open. The fastest and easiest way for the state of Oregon to keep these plants open or to encourage the development of other plants to solve the crisis in the timber products industry is to look at, the DQ agreement, the solution to pollution is pollution. The solution to this problem is diluting this cost, okay, over the broad number of megawatt hours that are consumed by ratepayers that are megawatt hours that are used by ratepayers in the state of Oregon. The economic effect is minimal, but the PUC needs the license to do so, because in their silo, it's all about your plant, what you cost versus another technology that is cheaper, regardless of whether that other technology may have received 30% tax credits, ongoing production tax credits, finance incentives, or whatever from the federal government, the state government, utility programs, preferential bidding and RFPs, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to do, our purpose here is not, we're going around like poster children. This is the March of Dimes. We're asking you to look at what we do, value what we do if you find it valuable, and then communicate to people who can do something about it. I don't expect that DOE, that ODOE has any kind of budget that can help us, or BEQ. Okay, but you can look at regulations that might be, stymieing what we do, or ways that you can express how important we are and plants like us are to the people who can make a difference. Say, by the way, PUC, this plant is very important, plants like this are very important to the environment for the following reasons. They're very important to our energy profile for the following reasons. Very important to microgrids, very important to communities, very important to public health, and very important to emergency management. And if that message gets delivered, that was my hope, that a gathering like this would at least, put a highlighter on what our industry does in the state of Oregon, the crisis that we face, the cost of us going away and trying to come back. And then, how can we influence the people who can actually do something about it? California got, how many plants were built in the 1980s because they had a forward price curve that was based on belief of where foreign oil prices were going.
that started out in the sixties and ended up at 120. And $120 a megawatt hour was the 1999 price, and ratepayers paid it. And, you know, it was a 10-year strip, and then the prices crashed and the plants closed. So it's all about will and a desire to pay, but the cost is not a big cost when it is incorporated in the entire rate.
So I'm hearing that the PUC to allow Pacific Corp or whomever to rate base all the energy attributes as well as the community benefits.
In our dialogues with Pacific Corp, we have gotten encouragement. They said, we want you, we need you, we see you as an important capacity resource, we see you as an important asset to the community. It's really not a good look for us with fires caused by substations and transmission lines for a plant like you to go away. We agree with all of that. However, you know, we have to buy electricity that we're allowed to buy from the PUC.
There's a hand raised on the screen. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, it's Trent.
Trent.
Yeah, this is
Trent, go
Trent.
ahead.
So I just wanted to share something between Riddle and Biomass One. We have a higher fire risk than 96% of the communities in the US with 2 cogen plants. I find that shocking.
Can you repeat that one more
Can you
time?
say that one more time, Trent, please?
I can. Between on the geography between Riddle and White City, where DR Johnson Cogen 2 is located and where Biomass 1 is located, we have a very high risk of wildfire, higher than 96% of communities in the US.
So if I could encapsulate that into a potential solution pathway, it would be to look for ways to take fire suppression funding and divert them into maintaining facility operations.
Yeah, and I think what one of the things that Greg is referring to is this is existing infrastructure. There's not a good reason why that wildfire risk should be higher here. We have the existing infrastructure in place to deal with it today.
And I would add, we are a facility with 0 debt. If you think, if we go away and you gotta build a new one's $150 to $180 million to build. Okay, to satisfy everything that Michael's office needs us to do is $26 million. 10 of which we have to do anyway. We have to put ASPs on. Okay, we have to upgrade our ASPs. Go ahead, Bill, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I want to throw out something that starts with those executive orders potentially, but it gets back to how California, where we always have better ideas, of course, partially solved this same exact issue. This applies to both Biomass One and DR Johnson. Basically, the legislature became convinced that the wildfires were a dramatic problem in California. It wasn't easy to figure that out. It wasn't hard to figure it out because everybody was suffering smoke all the summer long every summer. So they directed the PUC to hold an auction held by the utilities to save existing biomass plants. Were the only bidders that could participate in this. And they said, you're going to save 150 megawatts of capacity in California existing biomass plants, but they will have to burn at least 80% forest residual materials in order to qualify. They tiered this up over time. It started at 60 and then worked its way up to 80. And they said, they are bidding in this so that things like no debt would allow Greg to bid a lower cost than someone else and that might still be paying off their facility. And they held the options. They were successful. They negotiated contracts and those plants are still operating today. They've got extensions to those over time, but it started with something like these executive orders that was then translated into legislation that passed the legislature, but the direction was to the PUC, who didn't like it. Because their number one charge is to keep rates low for ratepayers. Right. But they went ahead and did it. And it wasn't pretty, but it was a solution that preserved the benefits.
Well, the only difference is I would argue that California probably had 500 megawatts of possible restarts and they only wanted 150. In Oregon, you're 15 together, and we're 30. There's 45 in the state, and together that represents 1.5% of the total generating capacity of the state of Oregon. So again, it is a fly spec. And anything that is done, right now through the PUC, if there's some special consideration for existing biomass plants through an RFP that right now is bidding in where, the deadlines are, 2029 or whatever, I can tell you there's not going to be a new plant built. If the deadline is 2029 and you test the waters and see, does this work? How affordable is it? And then if you want another plant or two more plants, you bid out another 30 megawatts, another 60 or whatever, depending on what's going on or in anticipation of more waste, more residuals coming out of the forest. The problem is, in order for the, as we learned in Madison, Wisconsin, at the U.S. Endowment Conference last week, it's the forest products industry is a three-legged stool. It depends on sawmills to pay to get the log out of the woods. And that cost has to be supported by someone who's going to buy the chips and the residuals. And without the chips and the residuals, the sawmill can't afford to take it out at a price that is competitive with the South, with the Southwest, the Southeast, with Canada, and other places. The U.S. is going to demand the timber it's going to demand. If we don't log here, it's going to be logged somewhere else in a way that we can't control. So if we think we're doing a good job of controlling how harvesting occurs, and how environmentally friendly it can be, and how the residuals can be effectively utilized, then we can do things. And if we don't, it'll be done in Brazil in a very different way, or China, and it'll be done in a less environmentally responsible way, and it's all one plan.
I was going to ask the question of the agencies. We had a conversation earlier about the small scale renewable certification, and that there have been conversations among different agencies about how does that certification get taken care of, or what's the process. I'm curious from the folks who have been engaged in that, like, what else do you need to be able to move the conversation forward, since there are several different agencies that have been part of that conversation in the room? I'm curious.
I would say from DEQ's perspective, we don't have the authority to sign this certificate.
Okay, this is not here, so.
Yeah, it's managed by PUC. It's not managed by DEQ or ODOE. But the small scale renewable program does point to our RPS program, the renewable portfolio standard he works on. And so indirectly, we're kind of tied into it. So we can say whether a program complies with the RPS, but we don't necessarily create that certificate for the small scale renewable program. We don't manage it in any way. And so I think PUC is trying to figure out, I know they had a docket review this week where they were adopting some of the rules around the small scale renewable program. And so I haven't talked to them recently and see if that passed or what changes are being made. But I guess it would be maybe more clearly defining some of those rules within the small scale renewable program. I know that's something PUC is working on, but that seems to be a challenge, especially with biomass facilities. I think, Shannon, you mentioned some of the concern around when the small scale renewable, the legislation came up, there was concern there being too many biomass facilities. And so there were, I guess, some restrictions made around kind of, I think.
20 megawatt cap.
Yeah, creating a cap, but that hasn't necessarily borne out. And so is there perhaps a solution in making some adjustments there?
The irony is we're already in the RPS.
Yeah.
We're able to sell reps into the Oregon market, but yet we can't participate in the SSR bidding. That is a replacement path for us after our EPA expires.
Sure. You are for electricity credits, but not thermal credits, and that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Right. Because that language was put in there has to be the thermal application. So.
Yeah, for a secondary use.
And they definitely did not address that in the small scale renewables. That was more about what utilities were trying to include, like behind the meter solar and stuff like that. But that's a different for a different day. I'm looking up at there's some activity happening online here. I see over our heads, air quality benefit monetization through Oregon Health Authority is a suggestion. border region benefits from Northern California and Idaho. That's coming from Marta. Marta, do you want to come off mute and give us some thoughts, or are you in a good place to do that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. There you go.
Is this working?
Yes.
So this works.
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I really think there should be an angle of energy sovereignty here. Because that one will possibly carry as a focus that could be possibly supported by rural and legislators and lawmakers and decision makers at all levels of administration, whether it's federal or state, elected or agencies. I wrote there, what would Marco Hatfield do, right? If Marco Hatfield were in the room or online, former senator, if he foresaw that possibly in 10 plus years, we would see just absolutely detrimental impacts to existing facilities and possibly thousands of secondary job loss impacts to the industry in some of the counties hardest hit when the big timber went away, right? This is a generational cyclical threat. So that's why I really think we need to talk about energy sovereignty resilience, because who ends up being more vulnerable, who ends up not having biomass facilities that can do that black start and bring their communities back online with essential services. I think we can't say too much about that. Oregon is at a very pivotal point when it comes to job retention and economy stabilization. Just during this call, another warn notice went out that 98 workers in a healthcare insurance admin space, 98 workers are going to be laid off across 4 sites in Oregon. Different industry, but it highlights the need to support all industries, including this very, very key one to us, with everything we got. Worst case scenario, a possible, I don't know, state of energy emergency in 10 years. How do we work backwards to prevent a worst case scenario in 10 years and also address the issues for our employers today that they very clearly phrased to us? Thank you so much.
Well, you could bring up, an interesting, you were talking about California and what has happened, and they, in the energy space, have declared that there are some critical energy reserve facilities that need to remain online. Specifically, they were looking at gas plants. These types of facilities, if there was declared that state of emergency, both in terms of energy security and in terms of landscape health and rural economics, that could be executive office, it could be legislative, but and it would, as Greg pointed out, it's a pretty finite list of folks and facilities that would be ready to roll forward. You're operating, you've got 2 ready to roll. There's a handful of them out there, Bill. You're very well aware of them and have been inventorying. And as you're pointing out, in other parts of the nation, folks are contemplating building new biomass plants just to stand up the rest of the vertical integrated industry.
No, in Oregon, not the nation, I mean, in Oregon, there's tremendous interest in doing it in Oregon.
So I don't know, I don't have that authority, that's for darn sure. There's a lot going on up there in the chat here.
You could also probably put decrease in insurance, homeowner insurance on there if more of these facilities were built in terms of wildfire costs or insurance.
I attended an insurance conference that talked about the unpriced risk and uninsurable risk of wildfires going through a community, and of the people whose homes are not damaged and businesses are not damaged, and the economic devastation of the diminishment of people willing to travel to that community, to go out to dinner, to go to theater, to go to the park, and the you know, the house that may have been worth $900,000 before the fire is worth $300,000 after. It loses its neighborhood appeal, and those are the even more tragic consequences. The person who loses their home hopefully has the means to rebuild it. The person whose business is burned out has the means to rebuild it once they can find the contractors and the materials to do so. The person whose home is not affected is affected. And there's no claim that's paid out. And so that person who is hoping to move or relocate is now stuck in a position, the retiree, the family of the person who passes away, all of a sudden has an illiquid asset. So there are consequences that are far felt from the fires. And as we've seen in Phoenix and Towns, where we received all of the detriments from that disaster, those communities are still a shadow of their former selves, and they look like they were in the middle of an armed conflict.
So we are at the close of our meeting here, and now I have all your contact information. So we will be following up with you and hoping that you will continuing to engage. Also really inviting you to reach out with follow-up thoughts, solutions, opportunities. I know there's a lot to unpack here, and I just decided that we could be SOBI, Save Oregon Biomass Energy. If somebody has a better one. Let's do that. The reports will be finalized. I think greenhouse gas is going to continue on with a little bit more refinement. But the whole idea was yes, to save biomass one facility, but also to have those as case studies that any of us have access to that we can use. They've been really, really good about using best practices, transparency in their analysis, in the inputs, so that they're really designed to take off the shelf and bring to any conversation that you're in. If there are other conversations that are going on that you think we should be in, or that that we might not be aware of, please overshare. I'm very interested in that. We really need to keep that facility open and get your facilities open, and there's tremendous more benefit that we can have across the state, as we're hearing here. So any final closing words from anyone else before we wrap?
I have a question. Does anybody here, did this help? Does this make a difference for anybody? Do you guys? I mean, you guys are all part of the decision in moving things forward. So, I mean, does this make a difference? Anybody have anything to say about it?
I'd say for myself, for DEQ, I've had many conversations with Greg about Biomass One, but this is the first time we've heard about DR Johnson. We're a big organization. I'm sure you're working with regional folks.
Yeah.
But it's helpful for me to see the bigger picture, and the research that y'all have done has been really helpful too. I got all those questions. I'll send to you, Josh, about some of the air quality data, but I really appreciate you all looking at the health benefits for it as well. I think that's a good message to share to you, that there's some health benefits that come to Oregon and doing the work that you do.
Huge benefits, and the DEQ has been great with us and extremely helpful, and we're very thankful for that. I think everybody in here has, but I just want to make sure that when we leave, that we're going to do something with this. I don't want to just come out here and talk about it and not do anything with it. It's super important. It's important for all those families, just like you pointed out a little bit ago. Those are people, those are real people that need something, and that's what we're here for. We care, we honestly care, and we want to make sure to want to provide jobs to people. We want to not burn our forest down, and energy resilience would be good too.
I 100% agree. I think all of the data is really interesting. I'd also just say that Jessica LaBerge in the governor's office put in the comments that this, we need to be looping the representatives in. That's something that the state sometimes has a hard time doing, just in our position at ODO. But you guys can advocate with your own legislatures. I know that she doesn't represent Biomass One, but Representative Pam Marsh is a huge advocate for energy issues, and she would be really interested in some of the data, especially the economics of it. And then Berkeley, Wyden, and Benz, I think this is a bipartisan issue, and it's just really getting the information to the right people.
And we are working on that representative work. Great, so, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And to bring things into sharp relief, Bill, you talked about jobs, like our Inwood team is run by 3 people. Actually 5. We have 1 leader and 2 two-man crews that go out into the woods, plus all of the support, armies of trucks bringing the material in. That operation with 2 grinders and all of the contract trucking and our own trucking that is involved carries out about 40,000 bone dry tons a year of material, in other words, 30 to 40,000. The price of that material is $50 to $60 an hour. And we're selling our power right now at 89. Okay, that is our least margin. Okay, that's the fuel we burn because we need to run 12 months out of the year to generate the revenue to pay the salaries and the rest of the company. So, the old rule of economics, cover your fixed costs and make a contribution, cover your variable and make a contribution to fixed. That's what our Inwoods operation does. When I think about the independent contractors who bring Inwoods material into us, it's a guy with an equipment lease who brings home a check every week and his wife does the accounting. If we put him out of business, he's not coming back very quickly. He's moving away and no one's, giving him a new loan for a new piece of equipment after he's defaulted on his equipment loan. So that destruction of that inventory, of that infrastructure is not easily recovered. Kurt can go and work hard to restart our plant. I can try to find the capital. But the people who get out our fuel, the people who truck our fuel, the independent truckers, those people, they don't come back that quickly. And that's the thing, once you lose it, sometimes you lose it forever. And all those mill jobs, I care as much about those mill jobs as I do about our own employees. And I don't want to be, that's why we're sounding the bullhorn, that we're part of this. It's not, we're not the most important part, but, I hate for our even temporary closure to lead to more job losses and more negative economic consequences. But we thank you.
Thank you
everybody,
again.
really for gathering here and helping us out.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mike.
Well said.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Hoping to be trying to get past it.
Don't see her.